The alarm went off at 3:45 in the morning, and Clara Whitfield was already awake. She'd been lying on her back in the dark for 20 minutes, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a lopsided rabbit, listening to Lily breathe from the next room. The sound was soft and even, the sound of a child who trusted the world completely, who didn't know yet that the world was not always worthy of that trust. Clara got up without turning on the light. She'd done this so many times that her body knew the path: 7 steps to the bathroom, 4 to the closet, 2 to the dresser, where she kept her apron folded on top of her jeans. She dressed in the dark the way soldiers dressed for war, quick, methodical, without ceremony. There was no one to impress at 4 in the morning. There was only the work. She paused at Lily's door on the way out. Just for a moment, the nightlight cast a soft orange glow across her daughter's face, and Clara felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Part love, part terror, part something that didn't have a name yet. Lily was 6 years old, and she slept with her arms flung wide, like she was trying to embrace the whole world at once, like she wasn't afraid of anything. Clara had been like that once. She pulled the door almost closed and went downstairs. The kitchen was hers in a way the rest of the world wasn't. It was the basement level of a narrow brick building in southeast Portland, a space she'd rented from Harold Oates for 3 years now. Harold, who was 72 and smelled like pipe tobacco and never once raised her rent, bless him. The ceiling was low and the ventilation was questionable, and in the summer it got hot enough to make anyone miserable. But Clara had scrubbed every inch of it until it gleamed, had installed her own shelving and her own pot rack, had hung the framed photo of her grandmother over the proofing station like a saint's icon. Eleanor Whitfield, 1987, National Baking Competition, first place. Gran hadn't looked like someone who won things. She'd looked like someone who endured things small and wiry, with flour perpetually in her gray hair and a laugh that came from somewhere deep in her belly. She'd taught Clara everything: how to read dough by touch, how to know when butter was the right temperature just by pressing it with your thumb, how to stay calm when the oven ran hot or the meringue wept or a delivery was going wrong. Crying doesn't fix pastry, Gran always said. Neither does panicking. The only thing that fixes pastry is patience and better technique. Clara tied on her apron and turned to the prep list she'd written out the night before. Saturday Henderson wedding cake, 6 tiers fondant, finished delivery. 11 a.m., 4 dozen lemon cardamom shortbreads for the Morrison baby shower. Croissant dough for Monday, brioche for Tuesday. She'd promised herself she would sleep more than 4 hours tonight. She hadn't. She started with the croissant dough because it needed the longest chill time, laminating butter into the flour with the focused attention of someone diffusing something. Fold, turn, fold. Press, turn, fold. Her hands knew the count even when her mind wandered, which it did to Lily's runny nose from yesterday. That might be nothing or might be the beginning of a cold. To the electricity bill she'd paid 2 days late. To the voicemail from Tom Ellison at the community kitchen, who wanted to know if she was interested in a shared space arrangement that might mean giving up her basement entirely. She didn't want to give up her basement. She wanted to build a proper bakery here. She'd been saving toward it for 2 years, a jar on the top shelf that she added to in small increments, after expenses, after Lily's school fees, after the health insurance premium that had gone up again in March. The jar had $940 in it. A proper storefront build-out would cost $60,000 minimum. She folded the dough. By 5:30, she had the croissant dough in the refrigerator, the brioche sponge bubbling gently under a damp cloth, and she'd started on the shortbreads. The basement smelled like butter and cardamom and the particular sweet, yeasty warmth of things that were in the process of becoming. This was the part of the job she never got tired of: the early quiet, the transformation, the sense that she was coaxing something out of raw ingredients that hadn't existed before. Her phone buzzed on the work table. She ignored it. It buzzed again. On the third buzz, she wiped her hands and looked. Harold. Clara, I need you to call me first thing this morning. I'm sorry, it's not bad news exactly, but it's news. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she put the phone face down and finished measuring out the cardamom, because the shortbreads needed her attention more than her anxiety did right now. And because Gran's voice was very clear in her head: crying doesn't fix pastry. She called Harold at 6:15 when the first batch was in the oven, and she had a few minutes. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. Harold. Clara. A pause. She could hear him breathing. I didn't sleep last night. I want you to know that. What happened? Another pause, longer this time. I sold the building. The kitchen was very quiet. The oven hummed. Outside Portland was beginning to wake up. She could hear a distant siren, the rumble of a garbage truck on Hawthorne. "You sold it," she said. "My daughter's been after me for 2 years. You know Patrice." He sounded old and tired and genuinely sorry. "The property value's gone up so much, Clara. The offer they made, I'd have been foolish to say no. I'm 72 years old and my knees hurt, and I've been thinking about Florida." "When?" she asked. "The sale closes in 3 weeks. The new owners will want to meet with all the tenants about transition plans. It's a development company, commercial real estate. They'll probably want the space for something else." 30 days. She'd spent 3 years building this kitchen, investing in equipment, building a client list, and she had 30 days. "I'm sorry," Harold said again. "I really am. I should have given you more notice. I should have—" "It's okay, Harold," she said, because it was easier than the truth. "I understand." She hung up and stood in the middle of her kitchen and breathed. The oven timer went off. She took out the shortbreads. They were perfect, golden and fragrant, exactly right. She looked at them for a long time, and then she began portioning them onto the cooling rack with the same steady hand as she always used. And she did not cry because she was a baker, and bakers didn't cry. They just kept mixing. The survey crew showed up at 9. Clara was deep in the wedding cake she'd been working on, the fondant draping, for 2 hours, and had hit a delicate phase where the paste needed to lie perfectly, or the whole middle tier would have to be redone, when she heard footsteps overhead. Heavy ones. More than one person. Moving through what had been Harold's empty second-floor office space. She ignored it for 20 minutes. Then something dropped, something heavy, and she could hear voices, professional-sounding, voices discussing load-bearing walls and square footage and HVAC systems in the clipped language of people who had been hired to look at a building and see only its potential, not its current occupants. She covered the wedding cake and went upstairs. There were 4 of them, 3 in hard hats with clipboards, and 1 in a charcoal suit, who was standing in the middle of the empty second floor with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing complex mathematics in his head. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of controlled posture that usually meant military or old money, or both. His suit was not the kind people bought off a rack. He didn't look at her when she came in. "Excuse me," she said. One of the clipboard men turned. "Ma'am, this is a private." "This is my building," Clara said, then corrected herself. "I'm a tenant here. I work in the basement. I'd like to know what's happening." The man in the suit turned then. He had gray eyes, the particular gray of Portland winter sky, and they assessed her with a kind of calm efficiency that was almost impersonal. He wasn't rude. He was simply very certain of where he stood in any given room. "Donovan Ashford," he said. He didn't extend his hand. "I've purchased this property. Are you one of the current tenants?" "Clara Whitfield. I lease the basement kitchen space. I received a call this morning that the building had sold, but no one told me a survey was happening today." "We move quickly," he said. "Not an apology, just a fact." "I can see that." She kept her voice even. She'd learned that evenness was a kind of armor. "I'm in the middle of a wedding cake that needs to be delivered in 2 hours. I'd appreciate knowing whether your moving quickly is going to include anyone entering the basement." He looked at her steadily. "Not today. And next week, next month, I have equipment down there, significant equipment. I have clients. You'll receive a formal letter outlining the transition timeline." He was already turning back to his ceiling. "If you have specific concerns, you can contact our tenant liaison." The dismissal was polite and complete. Clara stood there for a moment, feeling something hot moving through her chest. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something between them that had no good word. "Mr. Ashford," she said. He turned back, waited. "I've been in that kitchen for 3 years. I built most of it with my own hands and my own savings. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a business that I've grown from nothing. I am not a line item on a transition timeline. I am a person who works here, and I'd appreciate being spoken to like one." Something shifted very slightly in those gray eyes. She wasn't sure what. It wasn't softness, more like acknowledgement. The slight recalibration of someone who'd encountered unexpected resistance. "Understood," he said. "You'll hear from us by end of week." Clara went back downstairs and finished her wedding cake with perfect hands and a heart that was absolutely pounding. She delivered the Henderson cake at 10:58. Shannon Henderson cried when she saw it. The good kind of crying, the kind that made Clara feel like the 4 hours she'd spent on the fondant drapery had been worth every moment. Shannon was 26 and getting married in a sunflower yellow dress and she'd told Clara that what she wanted was a cake that looked like something from a fairy tale. And Clara had given her exactly that. "It's perfect," Shannon kept saying. "It's exactly perfect." Clara smiled and helped carry it to the venue's refrigeration, and didn't mention that she might not have a kitchen to make cakes in by this time next month. On the way home, she stopped at Maggie's flower shop, which occupied the ground floor of the building next door. Maggie Tran had been her best friend for 4 years, ever since they'd both been at the same neighborhood association meeting, arguing about the proposed development that would have blocked their natural light. They'd bonded immediately over a shared willingness to be the loudest people in a room when the situation called for it. Maggie was arranging a funeral arrangement. She did a lot of funeral arrangements, which Clara always found somewhat at odds with Maggie's relentlessly cheerful personality, and she looked up when Clara came in and immediately said, "What happened?" "Harold sold the building." Maggie set down her eucalyptus. "No." "Yes." "When did you find out?" "This morning. And by 9 o'clock, there was already a survey crew in there and some CEO in a suit telling me I'd be hearing from his tenant liaison." Tenant liaison, Maggie made the phrase sound like an insult. "Who bought it?" "Ashford Holdings, commercial real estate." Maggie looked it up on her phone with the quick efficiency of someone who Googled everything immediately. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that's Clara. This guy's company is behind the River District development and the Pearl Street renovation. He's not small time." "I know." Clara sank onto the stool Maggie kept behind the counter for exactly these kinds of conversations. "I don't know what to do. If I lose the kitchen, you find another one. With what money I've been saving toward a real space for 2 years, and I have less than $1,000. The equipment alone, the deck oven, was $12,000, Maggie. Could you get it out? Move it. Where commercial kitchen rental in Portland is $4,000 a month minimum for anything viable. I can't." She stopped, breathed. "I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." Maggie looked at her with the particular expression she used when she thought Clara was lying. "You don't have to be okay right now. I have Lily to pick up at 3. You have until 3. You don't have to be okay until 3. Clara looked at the funeral arrangement on the work table. White lilies and green fern and something that might have been wisteria, all of it meticulously composed. Maggie was good at her job, Clara thought. The kind of good that didn't look like effort. "Tell me something," Clara said. Does it ever stop feeling like you're just one bad month from losing everything?" Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been one bad month from losing everything for 4 years, and I'm still here, so maybe surviving it enough times is the same as it stopping." "That's not very comforting." "No," Maggie agreed, "but it's true." Clara picked up a loose stem of baby's breath from the work table and twirled it between her fingers. Outside the window, Portland was doing what Portland did in October, overcast and damp, and smelling of wet leaves and coffee, beautiful in that melancholy Pacific Northwest way that Clara had never quite managed to be indifferent to, even in her worst moments. "He looked at me like I was a problem to be managed," she said. "Donovan Ashford, like I was a zoning issue. CEOs usually do. I told him I was a person." Maggie smiled. "And he said understood in a way that suggested he hadn't particularly wanted to be informed of that." "Sounds about right." Maggie picked up her eucalyptus again. "Listen, you go get Lily. You make dinner. You go to sleep. Tomorrow looks different than today looks. It always does." Clara nodded. She knew Maggie was right. She just didn't entirely believe it yet. Lily had a runny nose and slightly glazed eyes when Clara picked her up from school, which meant the thing Clara had been trying not to think about all day was now unavoidable. She took Lily's temperature in the car, 99.2. Not high enough for alarm, high enough for concern. "My head feels fuzzy," Lily said from the back seat. She was still wearing her backpack because she always forgot to take it off, and she was holding the small stuffed rabbit she'd carried everywhere since she was 2. "I know, baby. We're going to go home and have soup." "Can we have the noodle kind?" "Absolutely the noodle kind." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Then Mommy, is our bakery going to go away?" Clara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who told you about that?" "I heard you talking on the phone this morning, before you left." She'd thought Lily was asleep. She was always underestimating what Lily heard. "It might change," Clara said carefully. "Things might look different for a while, but we're going to be okay." "But where would you make the cakes?" "I'll figure that out." "But where?" "Lily." Clara kept her voice steady. "I will figure it out. That's what I do, right? I figure things out." Lily considered this. Then, "Yeah," she said with the simple trust of a 6-year-old who had watched her mother figure things out often enough to believe it was a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or the noodle kind of soup. Clara made dinner the promised noodle soup from scratch because Lily always knew the difference and gave Lily children's Tylenol and read her 3 chapters of the book they were working through about a girl who talked to horses, and by 7:30, Lily was asleep with the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking and a legal pad she'd been making notes on. Options. 1. Fight to stay in the building, negotiate with Ashford Holdings for longer lease terms, possibly at higher rent. Problem, couldn't afford higher rent. 2. Find shared commercial kitchen space, Tom Ellison's offer. Problem, no exclusivity, scheduling conflicts, no storage for her equipment. 3. Find new standalone kitchen space, preferred option. Problem, cost. 4. Apply for small business development loans. She'd looked into this twice and been discouraged by the income requirements. But maybe look again. 5. Catering model work from clients' kitchens. No fixed space. Problem, impossible with wedding cakes. Impossible without storage. Lily's schedule made mobility difficult. She added a 6th option and then crossed it out immediately. Ask Ruth for a loan. Ruth Whitfield was Ben's mother. She was a perfectly decent woman who had never been anything but kind to Clara, and she helped with Lily twice a week, and she would have said yes without hesitation. But she would also have said quietly, gently, Ben would have known what to do the way she always did when things went wrong, and Clara didn't think she could hear that right now. Ben had been dead for 3 years. He died on a Tuesday in February when a scaffold gave way on a construction site in Beaverton, and the first thing Clara had thought, the first horrible reflexive thing, was who's going to pick up Lily? Because that had been the texture of their lives even at the worst moments. Who was picking up Lily? Who was making dinner? What needed doing? What came next? Ben would have known what to do. Maybe, or maybe he would have sat at this same table with this same legal pad and made this same list and crossed out this same option. She didn't know. She'd never know. That was the particular cruelty of it, not just losing him, but losing the ability to know what he would have done, who he would have been. Ben at 38 was unknowable now. She could only ever know him at 34, which was who he'd been when the scaffold gave way on that Tuesday in February. She put the legal pad face down and finished her tea. Before she went to bed, she went back down to the kitchen. She always did this, a last check, making sure everything was off and clean, the proofing station clear, the work tables wiped. It was partly habit and partly something else, the need to be in this space one more time before the day was done, to feel the particular quality of its quiet. She was wiping down the last work table when she noticed something on the floor near the bottom of the stairs. A small piece of wedding cake, a fragment of the bottom tier she'd trimmed off this morning, still sitting on a scrap of parchment where she'd left it. She'd meant to throw it away. She looked at it for a moment, then left it where it was. Someone else could deal with it in the morning. She turned off the lights and went to bed. She did not know that 6 hours later, Donovan Ashford would come back to walk the building alone, the way he always walked properties after the survey crew was gone in the dark, with a flashlight, getting a sense of a space without the noise of other people's opinions. She did not know that he would find the basement unlocked. Harold's locks had always been lax, that he would stand in her kitchen for a long moment, looking at the equipment, the grandmother's photograph, the careful order of everything. That he would pick up the fragment of wedding cake almost absently, the way people pick up things they're not thinking about, and put it in his mouth. She did not know that he would stand in her kitchen in the dark for several minutes after that, not moving. She did not know that he would go home to his penthouse afterward and stand at the window looking at the city and think unexpectedly about the smell of cardamom. Some things you find out later. The formal letter from Ashford Holdings arrived on Thursday, not by mail, but by hand delivery. A young woman in a blazer who knocked on the basement door while Clara was in the middle of laminating croissant dough and said very politely that she was from the tenant liaison office and was Clara Whitfield available for a brief consultation. Clara was not particularly available, but she set down her dough. The letter was several pages of legal language that boiled down to the following. The building sale had closed. Ashford Holdings intended to develop the property as part of a larger commercial revitalization project. Current tenants were encouraged to arrange alternative accommodations within 60 days, and the company appreciated Clara's patience and cooperation during this transitional period. 60 days was 10 more than Harold had suggested. It was still not enough. "Is there someone I can speak to?" Clara asked the woman from the liaison office. "Not a letter, an actual person. You can submit a written inquiry to our tenant relations department." The woman said with the practiced sympathy of someone who said this many times a day. I'm submitting a verbal one right now. I can pass along a message. Please tell Mr. Ashford that I'd like a meeting. Clara Whitfield. He knows who I am. Whether he did or didn't, she wasn't certain. But she said it with enough confidence that the woman wrote it down. She went back to her dough. She had orders to fill. She had a business to run. She had 60 days, which was 59 days more than zero. The meeting didn't happen that week. On Saturday, Ruth came over to watch Lily. Ruth Whitfield was 61 and still moved like someone younger with the brisk competence of a woman who'd raised 3 boys and run a household for 30 years. She had Ben's eyes, which Clara could never quite get used to, that particular shade of dark brown, very warm, very direct. You look tired, Ruth said, which was her way of saying she was worried. I'm always tired, Clara said, which was her way of saying she was fine. Ruth settled into the armchair she claimed as her own on her Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Lily immediately climbed into her lap, and Clara watched them for a moment. Her daughter with her dead husband's mother. 2 people who loved Ben in different ways and had both learned to carry that love in the ordinary furniture of daily life and felt the usual complicated tangle. Harold told me about the building, Ruth said over Lily's head. News travels. He felt terrible. He called me specifically to say he felt terrible. He didn't need to do that. Clara picked up her apron. I'm going downstairs to work. Clara, Ruth's voice was gentle. Ben would have. I know, Clara said. I'm sure he would have. I have a brioche order to finish. She went downstairs. She worked for 4 hours without stopping, because work was the one thing that was entirely hers, not tied to grief or memory, or the particular weight of being loved by people who missed the same person she missed. And in work, she could be just herself, just Clara, just a woman who understood flour and heat and time. The brioche came out perfect. It always did. On Monday, the meeting happened. She hadn't expected it. She'd given her name to the liaison woman more out of stubbornness than genuine expectation. But at 8:30 in the morning, her phone rang with an unknown number, and a woman's voice said that Mr. Ashford had a 10-minute window at 2 o'clock if Miss Whitfield was available. She rearranged 3 things and said yes. The Ashford Holdings offices were in the West Hills, in a building that was itself a statement about what Donovan Ashford thought buildings should be. Clean lines, generous light materials that suggested permanence. She'd looked him up over the weekend. He was 41, Yale-educated, had taken his father's regional construction company and built it into one of the most significant commercial development firms in the Pacific Northwest. He'd been married once. He gave money to affordable housing initiatives, which Clara found both admirable and deeply ironic given her current situation. He was already standing when she was shown into his office, which she took as a point in his favor. Standing when a visitor entered was a basic courtesy that a lot of men his age forgot. Ms. Whitfield, he gestured to a chair. Sit down. I prefer to stand, she said. I won't be long. He settled back against his desk instead of going behind it, which she also noted. It was a different posture than the one he'd had in the building, less formal, though still very controlled. You asked for a meeting, he said. I did. I wanted to make my situation clear in person because I think some things don't communicate properly through letters. She practiced this on the drive over. She knew what she wanted to say, and she intended to say it cleanly without anger, without pleading. I have been in that kitchen for 3 years. In that time, I've built a client list of over 200 people, completed more than 40 wedding cakes, supplied 3 restaurants with pastry items, and grown my revenue by 60% year over year. My equipment is worth more than I paid for most of it because I've maintained it carefully. The space itself has had significant improvements made at my expense, the ventilation system, the drainage, the shelving. He was listening. She'd expected him to be on his phone or glancing at something, but he was just listening with those gray eyes steady on her face. I'm not asking for charity, she said. I'm asking for a genuine conversation about whether there's a version of your development plan that includes me. I'm good at what I do. I bring foot traffic and a reputation and the kind of neighborhood goodwill that is genuinely valuable and not always easily purchased. If your plan involves commercial food space, I'd like to be part of that conversation. Silence. He was quiet for long enough that she almost said something to fill it, which would have been a mistake. The current plan involves a mixed-use redevelopment, he said finally. Ground floor retail, upper floors converted to boutique commercial offices. The basement, we hadn't fully decided on the basement. The basement is already a functional professional kitchen. I'm aware. Something moved in his expression. I walked the property again this week. She looked at him for a moment when, early Wednesday morning, she thought about the wedding cake fragment she'd left on the parchment. She thought about cardamom, and she said, "I'd like to propose a trial arrangement," he said. 60 days as stated in your letter. During that time, we'd formally assess whether incorporating a food production space into the development plan makes commercial sense. You'd continue operating as you currently do. At the end of 60 days, we'd have a real conversation about lease terms going forward or not. It wasn't everything she'd wanted. It wasn't a guaranteed future or a signed lease or the security she needed. But it was 60 days and it was a real conversation, and it was more than she'd had this morning. "I want it in writing," she said. "Of course. And I want a direct contact, not the liaison office, someone who actually makes decisions." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card. Not his personal card, a card for someone named James Kwan VP of Development. But he'd written a number on the back in pen, and the handwriting was angular and decisive, the handwriting of someone who still wrote things down by hand. She took the card. She didn't say thank you because she didn't think she owed him gratitude for giving her the minimum. But she nodded, which meant something. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "The cake fragment from Wednesday morning." She watched his face. It was the Henderson wedding cake. Lemon elderflower with champagne buttercream. "I trimmed that piece off the bottom tier." He was quiet for a moment. "It was exceptional," he said. "I know," said Clara, and left. On the elevator down, she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something that might have been satisfaction before she put it away and started thinking about the 60 days and what she was going to do with them. 30 seconds was enough. The written agreement arrived on Wednesday, 2 pages clean. Language Donovan Ashford's signature at the bottom in the same angular handwriting as the business card. 60 days. Clara read it 3 times before she signed it, and then she called Maggie. "He gave you 60 days in a direct line," Maggie said. "He gave me 60 days and a VP's number. That's not nothing. It's not everything either." "No, but it's enough to work with." Clara pinned the agreement to the corkboard over her desk next to Grant's photo. "I'm going to use the 60 days to put together a proper business proposal. Revenue projections, foot traffic analysis, the whole thing. If I can show him that keeping me generates more value than replacing me, that's a better argument than anything else. You've been thinking about this a lot." "I think about everything a lot. That's my condition." She spent the next 3 days on numbers. She was good with numbers. Ben had always been the one who said he wasn't a math person, which Clara had always thought was an excuse rather than a fact, but she'd never argued the point. She pulled her records for 3 years: revenue clients, average transaction size, repeat, customer rate, referral percentage. She researched comparable food hall developments in Seattle and San Francisco and Austin, what the tenant mix had been, what the foot traffic looked like, what the lease rates were. The numbers were actually quite good. She'd never looked at them all in one place before, and seeing them arrayed in front of her was both gratifying and vaguely troubling. Gratifying because she'd built something real, troubling because she'd built something real and almost hadn't known it. By Thursday evening, she had a 12-page document that she was mostly satisfied with. She sent it to James Kwan at the VP's number and received an acknowledgement within the hour, which surprised her. She'd expected to wait days. What she didn't expect was a call the next morning from Donovan Ashford directly. "I read your proposal," he said, no preamble. "I assumed Mr. Kwan would review it first." "Kwan forwarded it to me immediately." A pause. "Your revenue growth projections are conservative." She'd thought so too. She'd lowballed them, deliberately expecting scrutiny. "I'd rather project low and perform high." "That's a reasonable approach. The foot traffic analysis is interesting. Where did you get the comparable data?" "Public records for the Market Street Food Hall in Seattle. Their development application had full projections. I cross-referenced with Portland's own foot traffic studies from the planning department." Silence. She could hear him thinking, or at least she had the impression of someone thinking, which wasn't quite the same thing. "I'd like you to come in again," he said. "Friday, if that works. Bring the underlying data. I have a delivery at 10. 2 o'clock. I can do 2 o'clock. He hung up. No pleasantries. She was starting to understand that this was simply how he operated, not rudeness so much as the complete absence of performance. He didn't say things he didn't mean. He didn't add social lubricant to conversations that didn't need it. She wasn't sure yet whether that made him admirable or exhausting. Possibly both. Patrick Ashford arrived at the basement door on Thursday afternoon unannounced, which was apparently something he did. He was 36 and looked like a softer, more approachable version of his brother. Same dark hair, but worn a little longer. Same height, but with a more relaxed way of carrying it, eyes that were more blue than gray. He was wearing a jacket that was expensive, but looked like he'd slept in it, and he was holding a coffee cup from the place on Division Street that always had a line out the door. "You're Clara Whitfield," he said. "I'm Patrick, Doan's brother." She'd been in the middle of tempering chocolate, and she set down her thermometer with some care. "I gathered. How did you get this door open?" "It was unlocked." He said this with complete innocence, which suggested to Clara that he had a habit of letting himself into places and had not yet encountered sufficient consequences for it. "Don mentioned you. I've been handling some of the tenant coordination on the project, and I wanted to introduce myself." "Your brother didn't mention you'd be coming." "He doesn't always." Patrick looked around the kitchen with frank curiosity, not the assessing look Donovan had used, but a genuinely interested one, the look of someone who found new places delightful. "This is incredible. How long have you been here?" "3 years. Can I help you with something specific, Mr. Ashford?" "Patrick." He smiled. It was a good smile, warm and a little crooked. "And honestly, I just wanted to see the place. Don's mentioned the kitchen several times this week, which for Don is basically an obsession." Clara stopped. "He mentioned it several times. In the context of the development plan, he keeps coming back to the potential of the food hall concept, and I think your proposal kind of crystallized something he'd been vague about." Patrick set his coffee on her work table. She noted it without saying anything and looked at the grandmother's photo on the wall. "Who's that?" "My grandmother. She won the national baking competition in 1987. "Seriously?" He looked more closely at the photo. "She looks like she could win anything." Clara felt something unexpected, the small, warm surprise of having Gran described exactly right by a stranger. "She was like that, yes." "What did she win with?" "A wedding cake, actually. She had a proprietary spiced buttercream that she'd spent years developing. The recipe's been in my family ever since." She turned back to her chocolate. "It's the only thing of hers I kept." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "Then can I ask you something? Is he treating you fairly?" "He's sometimes very direct and he doesn't always realize." "He's been direct," she said. "I appreciate direct. I don't appreciate being processed, which is what the liaison letter felt like. The conversation since has been better." "Good." He seemed genuinely relieved. "He's not bad, my brother. He spent a long time teaching himself not to let things in, and he got very good at it." He picked up his coffee again. "I'll let you get back to work. But if there's anything you need from the tenant coordination side, you have my number now." She hadn't been given his number. He put a card on her work table as he left, and she looked at it for a moment after he was gone. "Patrick Ashford, Director of Community Relations." Under his name, he'd written his personal cell number in handwriting that was nothing like his brother's. It looped and slanted, carefree and a little hard to read. She put it next to her phone without knowing exactly why. The Friday meeting at Donovan's office was different from the first. He'd cleared his afternoon, which James Kwan told her quietly when she arrived, as if this were information Clara needed to understand the significance of. She chose not to read too much into it. People cleared their afternoons for lots of reasons. But the conversation that followed was not like any conversation she'd expected to have with a commercial real estate developer. He asked about her sourcing, where she got her flour, her butter, her fruit, whether she had existing relationships with local farms, or if she used distributors. She answered, and as she answered, she could see him making connections, thinking about how those relationships might scale or extend in a food hall context. He wasn't just listening, he was using what she said. She found this both impressive and slightly disconcerting. He was very good at extracting value from information. "The local sourcing angle is interesting for the project narrative," he said. "There's been a lot of development in this corridor that the neighborhood has resisted because it feels corporate. A food hall with established vendors who have genuine community histories is a different story." "That's true, but I'd want to be clear that I'm not interested in being a project narrative," Clara said. "I'm a person who bakes for a living. If those things can coexist with your development goals, that's great. But I'm not going to perform authenticity for a marketing campaign." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's fair," he said, and noted. "Also, 60 days is not enough time to genuinely assess the commercial case. You already know that. The data I gave you is strong enough that you know whether you want me in the building or not. The 60-day language is a hedge, not a timeline. You're asking me to make a decision now. I'm asking you to be honest about whether you're going to make a decision at all. Because if the answer is eventually no, I need to start planning for that now, and I can't plan while I'm waiting. The afternoon light was coming through the west-facing windows, and it caught the gray in his hair in a way that made him look briefly like someone less certain than his usual posture suggested. She noticed this and filed it away without quite deciding what it meant. Give me 2 weeks, he said, not 60 days, 2 weeks. For a genuine decision. Yes, she held his gaze. All right. She didn't extend her hand, he didn't either. But there was something between them that felt like an agreement more binding somehow than the paper document she'd signed. She was almost at the door when he said, your grandmother's recipe. You said it was for a spiced buttercream. She stopped, turned. Yes. What spices? She looked at him. He was still sitting against his desk in that not quite formal posture, and he was asking about baking ingredients with the same deliberate attention he'd been bringing to revenue projections. And there was something about that, the refusal to distinguish between what was important and what wasn't, that she found unexpectedly interesting. I don't tell anyone that, she said. It's a family secret. Of course, he said, and then it was in the Henderson cake, the layer underneath the elderflower. You have a good palate for someone who probably eats most of his meals in boardrooms. The corner of his mouth moved. It might have been a smile. I grew up in a house with a good cook. She filed this away too. 2 weeks, she said, and left. The 2 weeks were strange. He came to the building 3 times, always with legitimate reasons, always brief, always with James Kwan or an architect or someone else. But each time he found an excuse to walk past the basement kitchen. And each time Clara found herself making something she didn't strictly need to make an extra batch of testing rounds, a trial of a new flavor combination, something that justified the smell of something good drifting up toward the stairs. She didn't examine this too closely. On the second visit, he came down. Kwan was looking at the HVAC with the building's engineer upstairs, and Donovan appeared at the top of the basement stairs and said, "May I PO?" And she said yes, because turning him away would have been unreasonable, and also because she was in the middle of a pain au chocolat batch that was at a critical stage, and she didn't want to lose focus by going up to him. He came down and stood near the bottom of the stairs with his hands in his pockets and watched her work. She was conscious of him in a way she didn't like, not in a threatening way. Nothing like that, but in the way you were conscious of something that disrupted the ordinary air of a room. He was too still. Most people fidgeted or looked at their phones or asked questions to fill silence. He simply stood and watched, and she couldn't decide if it was respectful or unnerving. You do everything by feel, he said after a while. I do everything by technique, she corrected. Technique eventually becomes feel. It's not intuition, it's practice. Is there a difference? A big one. Intuition implies you couldn't teach it to someone else. Technique means you could. She set the tray in the oven. Most things that look like gifts are just accumulated experience. He was quiet for a moment. That's a useful way to think about things. What things? Most things. He looked at the grandmother's photo. Does Lily bake? She turned to look at him. He'd looked her up, she'd expected that, but the sound of Lily's name in his voice was unexpected anyway. She helps sometimes. She's better at eating than making. Most people are. Do you cook at all? A pause that was fractionally longer than it needed to be. No, not at all. I have a very good housekeeper who also cooks. That's not the same as being able to cook. I know, he said. I've never particularly minded. She handed him a pain au chocolat that she'd pulled from the trial batch, still warm, slightly uneven on one end because she'd been testing a new shaping technique. Test it and tell me what you think. He took it. He ate it the way he did most things, attentively without performing the experience. He didn't say anything for a moment. The chocolate's bitter, he said. More than most. 72%. Most people use 55 or 60 because it's easier to work with and more crowd-pleasing. I prefer it. I know. Most people who say they don't like sweets actually just don't like cloying sweets. The flavor's there either way. He looked at her. That sounds like an observation about more than chocolate. It's an observation about chocolate, she said evenly and turned back to her prep. He left 20 minutes later with Kwan, and Clara stood in the middle of her kitchen for a moment afterward, very still, and told herself firmly that he was a business associate, and that was all. It was Maggie who noticed first. You're different when you talk about him, she said. They were having lunch at the small table in the back of the flower shop, eating the soup Clara had brought over because Maggie never remembered to eat lunch if not actively given food. I talk about him as a business complication, Clara said. You talk about him a lot for a business complication. Maggie ate a spoonful of soup. And you've redone your hair twice this week. My hair needed attention. It always looks like I've been working in a bakery because I work in a bakery. Clara, don't. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the face. Maggie arranged her expression into studied neutrality. What face? The face where you think something and then you think whether you should say it, and then you say it anyway because you always do. He's going to be your landlord, Maggie said. That's the thing. Even if everything else were different, and I'm not saying it is, that's a very complicated power dynamic to navigate. I know that. Do you? Of course I do. Clara ate her soup. It was very good soup. She thought it was very good soup because she was competent at making things, and this was a solid fact about the world that she could stand on. I'm not doing anything. I'm not thinking about doing anything. I'm trying to save my kitchen. Okay, Maggie said. Okay. But also your hair looks good this week. Clara pointed her spoon at Maggie. Finish your soup. The tipping point happened on a Thursday evening that she wouldn't have predicted. She'd been working late on a particularly complex order, a 6-tier birthday cake for a client whose vision involved hand-painted sugar flowers in 17 different varieties, and she'd been at it since 4 in the morning, and it was now 8 at night, and she was running on coffee and stubbornness. Lily was with Ruth. The building was otherwise empty. She heard footsteps at 7:55. She nearly called out, thinking it was Maggie coming by with dinner, the way she sometimes did. But then she thought it couldn't be Maggie because Maggie walked like someone who'd been told to be quieter and had chosen not to be. These footsteps were quiet, considered. Donovan appeared at the top of the basement stairs. He had his suit jacket off, which was the first time she'd seen him without it, and he was carrying what appeared to be takeout bags from the Thai place on Morrison. He looked at her. She looked at him. You've been here since this morning, he said. Quan mentioned the light was on when he came by at 6. Quan drives by at 6 a.m. He lives 2 blocks away. He came down the stairs without asking. Set the takeout bags on the far end of her clean work table, the end she wasn't using. You have to eat. I was going to eat when I finished. You were going to forget. He pulled up the stool she kept in the corner and sat down. When does it need to be done? Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. How much left? The last 2 tiers and the flower assembly. He looked at the sugar flowers laid out on the parchment, delicate and intricate and completely still, like something from a botanical illustration. He was quiet for a long moment. Tell me what they are, he said. The flowers. She looked at him. Why? Because you've been alone in here for 16 hours and talking helps. It was so matter of fact, not performing compassion, just stating a practical reality. She started eating the pad CU he'd brought. She was hungrier than she'd realized, and she told him about the flowers, ranunculus and sweet peas, and garden roses and peonies, and lily of the valley, and 12 others, each requiring a different technique, different wire gauges, different petal counts. She talked about sugar work the way she always talked about baking when she had someone to talk to, as if it were genuinely fascinating, because to her it was. He listened. He asked questions that were better than she expected, specific, technical, curious. Somewhere in the middle of a description of how she achieved the translucency in peony petals, she dropped the tu kung thuk. It fell out of her apron pocket when she reached for her tools, the folded paper she carried everywhere because she was terrified of losing it, the single sheet of her grandmother's handwriting with the spiced buttercream recipe that no one had ever seen the full contents of. It landed on the floor between them. Donovan picked it up before she could. He looked at it just for a moment, just the outside, the folded edge, before he held it back to her. What is it? He asked. She took it, held it. My grandmother's recipe, the spiced buttercream. The one from the competition? Yes. She turned it over in her hands. I've carried it in my apron pocket every day since she died. 12 years. I'm always terrified something will happen to it. She paused. I should have it photographed and stored somewhere. I never do. He was looking at her in a way she'd learned to recognize over these past 2 weeks. Not the CEO assessment look, something else. Something that arrived when she said things that were true and complicated. Why the apron pocket specifically, he asked. Because she always kept it in hers. Clara refolded the paper carefully. She'd reach into that pocket a dozen times a day, force of habit, making sure it was there. I do the same thing now. It's not rational. It's very rational, he said with a conviction that surprised her. It's a way of keeping something real that would otherwise become abstract. She looked at him. That's a specific way to understand it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I have my father's pocket watch. I don't wear it because I'm afraid of losing it. I keep it in the same drawer. I've had it in for 15 years and I take it out and look at it sometimes and that's all. He paused. My father died when I was 23. The watch is how I keep him from becoming abstract. It was the most personal thing he'd said to her in 2 weeks of conversations. She looked at him across the work table, and he looked at her, and the sugar flowers lay between them on their parchment, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Clara turned back to her work. I need to finish the ranunculus, she said. I know, he said, and he stayed. He left at 11 when the cake was done and the last sugar flower was set, and Clara was cleaning up with the particular quiet satisfaction of finished work. He said goodnight in that direct, unornamented way of his. She said goodnight back. She stood in the middle of her kitchen after he left and pressed her hand flat against the work table and breathed. Then she went upstairs, locked the door, and drove to Ruth's to pick up her daughter. He canceled the following 2 appointments. Not himself through Quan, with polite and professional language about scheduling conflicts. Clara received the first cancellation on Monday morning and didn't think much of it. CEOs had scheduling conflicts. The second one on Wednesday she received with less equanimity, though she told herself she was equanimous. On Thursday, James Quan called to say that Ashford Holdings had decided to proceed with the food hall development plan and would be reaching out about formal lease discussions in the following week. It was everything she'd wanted. It should have felt like a victory. It felt strangely hollow. She told Maggie over the phone. That's wonderful, Maggie said. You got what you wanted. Yes. Why do you sound like that? Like what? Like someone who got what they wanted and wasn't sure it was the right thing to want. Clara was standing in her kitchen at 6 in the morning watching the first light come through the small window near the ceiling. Outside it was raining because it was Portland in October, and of course it was raining. He stopped coming, she said, since last Thursday, and I can't tell if I care because it's unprofessional or because I care. Maggie was quiet for a moment. It's possible to care for 2 reasons at the same time. That's not helpful. No, Maggie agreed, but it's true. A pause. Clara, you know what's complicated about this, right? I know. Landlord and tenant, power differential, your entire livelihood depending on his goodwill. I know, Maggie. I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly. I'm always thinking clearly. It's my least useful quality. She hung up and started her prep list and told herself that what she felt was professional disappointment and nothing else, and was almost convincing about it. On Friday, she found a tin of tea on her work table when she came in at 4 a.m., Earl Grey loose leaf from the artisan tea shop in the Pearl District. No note, but the tin was placed exactly where she always set her mug. She stood looking at it for a long moment. Then she made tea and went to work and didn't let herself think about it too carefully because she had a business to run and a daughter to raise, and there was absolutely no room in her life for things that were too complicated to think about carefully. Absolutely no room at all. The formal lease discussion happened the following Tuesday, not with Donovan, but with Quan and a woman named Andrea from the legal team, which told Clara something about how Donovan had decided to handle things. She went in with her own figures and came out 2 hours later with a draft term sheet that was better than she'd expected. 5-year lease below market rate during the construction phase, a defined footprint that was 30% larger than her current space, and a priority position in the food hall's marketing materials. It was objectively a very good deal. She called Maggie from the parking lot. Sign it, Maggie said immediately. There's no personal guarantee clause. Even better, sign it. She signed it. She sat in her car in the parking lot of Ashford Holdings and signed a lease agreement that would give her the kitchen she'd been working toward for years, the thing she'd wanted more than almost anything. And she felt proud and relieved and also very slightly bereft in a way she didn't know what to do with. Patrick called that evening. I heard the lease came through, he said. Congratulations. Thank you. Don was very specific about the terms he wanted the legal team to offer. She held the phone a little tighter. Wouldn't let them lowball the construction phase rate. Quan pushed back. Standard practice is higher rates during construction because of the disruption, and Don just said no. A pause. I don't know if that's useful information or not. I just thought you should know. Why, she asked. Because I think knowing where things come from matters, Patrick said, even if it complicates things. After she hung up, she sat with her daughter on the couch watching a cartoon about a rabbit who solved mysteries, and Lily leaned against her shoulder, and Clara pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and thought about the fact that she had a kitchen, now a real one, a permanent one, and that somewhere in the process of getting it, she had also acquired a complication she hadn't planned for. She thought about how Donovan Ashford had told her about his father's pocket watch. She thought about a tin of Earl Grey tea on a work table with no note. She thought, I am a practical woman. I have a lease and a daughter and a business. These are solid facts. I will stand on them. And then she put Lily to bed and washed the dinner dishes and went down to her kitchen to prep for tomorrow. And when she reached into her apron pocket, her fingers found the folded recipe paper, and she held it there for a moment the way her grandmother always had. The way she always did. 3 weeks after the lease was signed, the construction began on the upper floors. It was noisy and disruptive, and occasionally rained plaster dust down through the ceiling in ways that were technically not Clara's problem, but were absolutely her problem practically, and she had to wrap everything and cover the proofing racks and keep a closer eye on the ambient temperature than usual. She did this without complaint because the lease had accounted for it, and she'd known what she was agreeing to. What she hadn't accounted for was how often Donovan walked the construction site. He came through every few days. She could hear him overhead, and sometimes through the back stairway, she could hear his voice lower than the contractors asking specific questions about structural integrity and timeline. He never came down. But twice she found things a bag of beans from the coffee roaster on Division Street sitting on the top stair. A folded copy of a Portland food industry report she'd mentioned she'd been trying to find. No notes. Nothing that required acknowledgement. She acknowledged them anyway by email to Quan because she wasn't going to pretend she didn't receive things she'd received. Quan responded each time with a terse, glad that was useful. She suspected Quan was relaying these acknowledgments and suspected Quan found the whole situation professionally bewildering. On a Friday in early November, she was doing a test batch of a new flavor, brown butter and black sesame, which she thought could become her signature winter tart when she heard footsteps on the basement stairs that were not the contractor and not Quan. Donovan came down and stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her. You've been avoiding me, she said. She hadn't planned to say it, but there it was. I've been clarifying appropriate professional boundaries, he said, by leaving me coffee and trade reports. Those were professional courtesies. They were more than that, and you know it. She set down her spatula. She was tired of the polite distance, tired of the careful language, tired of the particular effort of not thinking about someone she was thinking about anyway. I appreciate what you've done with the lease. I appreciate that you've thought about my situation and tried to help. But I'm not interested in receiving things anonymously and pretending I don't know where they come from. He was quiet. The construction was muffled down here, distant and rhythmic. I made a professional decision, he said finally, about what's appropriate given the business relationship. And was that decision based on what you actually wanted or on what you decided you should want? He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, not quite defensiveness, but the close cousin of it. The look of someone who'd been asked a question they'd hoped wouldn't be asked. Both, he said. That's honest at least. I'm always honest. I know. She picked up her spatula again. I don't want you to do anything differently. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it out loud instead of pretending, because I think pretending is mostly a waste of time. She turned back to her tart shells. You can go back upstairs. He didn't move. She could feel him not moving, which was a very specific sensation, like the air in the room had made a decision. I was married for 4 years, he said. She left because she said I wasn't capable of being present, that I could be in a room with someone and still be completely somewhere else. A pause. She wasn't wrong. Clara kept her hands moving, measuring black sesame into the blender, because motion was easier than stopping. I find you, he stopped, started again. I find it easier to be present in this kitchen than almost anywhere else I've been in years, and I don't know what to do with that. She blended the sesame. The machine was loud for 30 seconds, and then she turned it off, and the kitchen was quiet again. I don't know either, she said. She turned around. He was still at the bottom of the stairs. She was at the work table. There were maybe 8 feet between them, which felt like both too much and the right amount. The business relationship complicates things, he said. Yes, I own your building. I'm very aware. That's a significant power imbalance. Also aware. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to resolve it tonight. I'm not asking for anything tonight, except that you stop pretending you don't know why you keep coming back here." He was quiet for a long time. "I know why," he said. "Good," she said. "Then at least we're honest." She turned back to her tart shells. After a moment, she heard him walk back up the stairs. Not retreating, just leaving the way people left when they needed time to think. She worked until midnight. She got home to find Lily had left a crayon drawing on the kitchen table. A woman in an apron making something large and pink, which Clara assumed was a cake with a very round sun overhead, and what might have been a figure with dark hair, standing just at the edge of the paper. She stood looking at it for a moment, then she put it on the refrigerator. November came in hard. Portland did this, sometimes skipped the gradual descent into winter, and went straight from damp autumn to something colder and more serious, the kind of weather that stripped the last leaves off the oaks in Laurelhurst Park and sent them spinning down sidewalks in wet masses. Clara didn't mind cold. Cold meant people wanted comfort food, and comfort food was what she did best. The December wedding season was already beginning to fill her calendar. She had 6 wedding cake consultations scheduled for event orders and a standing weekly delivery to a restaurant in the Pearl District that had started ordering her brown butter tarts when she'd given them a test batch in October. The revenue projections she'd shown Donovan were, as she'd privately suspected, conservative. She was tracking 20% above them. She was also, by any reasonable measure, too busy. She was managing the noise and dust from the construction upstairs, managing Lily's school schedule, managing Ruth's twice-weekly visits with the particular care they always required, managing a client list that had grown faster than her capacity to serve it, and managing somewhere in the back of her mind the low-grade awareness of a man who kept not quite appearing and not quite staying away. She was very good at managing things. The morning Lily fell was a Thursday. Clara had been at the kitchen since 3:45. She'd had an emergency order come in late Wednesday from a client whose original baker had canceled a 2-tier rehearsal dinner cake needed by noon, and she was in the final stage, the piped rose border that required her full attention and both her steadiest hands, when her phone rang. The school's number. She knew the number. She set down the piping bag. "Ms. Whitfield, this is the office at Lily's school. There's been a small accident during recess. Lily took a fall from the climbing structure. She's okay, no head injury, but she's asking for you, and we think she may have hurt her wrist. We'd like you to come in." "I'm on my way," Clara said. She looked at the unfinished cake on the turntable. The rehearsal dinner was tonight, noon delivery. She had 3 hours. She called her client on the way to her car. No answer. She left a message. She drove to the school with her jaw set and her hands steady on the wheel because Lily needed her focused, and that was all there was. Lily was sitting in the nurse's office with her arm cradled against her chest and her face very pale, and when she saw Clara, she immediately started crying, the particular relief crying of a child who'd been brave until the moment their parent arrived. Clara sat down next to her and held her gently and didn't say anything for a moment, just let Lily cry. "It hurts," Lily said. "I know, baby, I know." The urgent care clinic confirmed what Clara had feared, a hairline fracture of the radius. "Minor," the doctor said. "Very common in children. A small cast, 6 weeks, she'd be fine." But Lily was in pain and frightened, and Clara sat with her through the whole thing, the x-ray and the casting and the wait, and watched her daughter's small face and felt the particular helplessness of being unable to take pain away from someone you would burn down anything for. They were home by 1:30. Clara's client had called back. The rehearsal dinner was non-negotiable. They'd need to find another option. "I'm so sorry," the client said, not sounding particularly sorry. Clara had lost the $8,000 contract she'd been counting toward her equipment upgrade fund. She sat at the kitchen table after Lily fell asleep on the couch with the television on softly, and she looked at the numbers on her phone. $8,000. 2 months of savings at her current rate, gone. She pressed her palm flat on the table. The wood was solid under her hand, real and present. She did not call anyone. She sat alone with it for a while, which was what she always did first, and then she made a cup of tea and started thinking about what could be salvaged. She was still at the table at 4 in the afternoon, Lily asleep, tea-cold legal pad covered in calculations, when someone knocked at the front door. She opened it to find Patrick Ashford holding what appeared to be flowers and takeout from the noodle place on Clinton Street. She looked at him for a moment. "Don called me," he said. "He heard about Lily through Quan. Apparently the school called your emergency contact list and you'd listed your business address, and Quan was at the site today." "I keep meaning to update that," she said. "Are you okay?" Lily's the one with the broken wrist. Are you okay? He said again with the patience of someone who understood that this was a different question. She stepped back and let him in. Patrick was easier to be around than his brother, in the way that straight roads were easier to drive than mountain ones, less interesting, but more relaxing. He set up the noodles in the kitchen and checked on Lily, who woke up groggy and brightened immediately at the presence of a visitor and extra attention. He had the easy manner with children that some people simply had, unforced, genuine, exactly the right amount of silliness. Lily showed him her cast with the pride of the recently injured. I picked purple, Lily said. It was my choice. Excellent choice, Patrick said seriously. Purple is significantly better than the other colors. That's what I thought. Clara made fresh tea and watched them and felt unexpectedly like she might cry. Not from sadness, but from the simple accumulated weight of the day and the noodles and the fact that someone had thought to come. I also lost a contract today, she told Patrick when Lily was settled back on the couch with the noodles and her rabbit. The rehearsal dinner cake, $8,000. I heard, Don mentioned it. He poured tea for them both. He wanted to come himself. She stopped. Why didn't he? Patrick held her gaze for a moment. Because he thought it would be presumptuous, and because he wasn't sure of his welcome. She thought about this. She thought about a man who was very certain of himself, in most contexts being uncertain of his welcome in her doorway. And she wasn't entirely sure how to hold that. He could have come, she said. I'll tell him. You don't need to tell him anything on my behalf. Fair enough. He drank his tea. The contract, is it a significant problem? I'll manage. You always say that, because it's always true. Patrick was quiet for a moment. I know Don offered to invest directly, and I know you turned it down. I'm not going to relitigate that. He set down his cup. But the food hall is going to need an anchor tenant for the opening, a marquee presence that gives the whole project credibility. Don's been trying to figure out who to approach. I think he's been thinking about it being you, but he's been awkward about asking because of everything else. If he wants to discuss business, he can discuss business. He will. I wanted you to know that the offer, whatever form it takes, isn't charity. You've built something real, Clara. It was real before he walked into it. He didn't make it real. She looked at her business partner's brother across the kitchen table, and she felt something settle, some small thanks she hadn't realized was unsettled. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Thank me by letting Lily teach me how to make soup when she's feeling better, because she apparently learned from you, and I've been told your soup is transcendent. Clara laughed. It came out of nowhere, which was the best kind of laugh. She mostly just adds too much pepper. Still, the Instagram post happened completely by accident. Shannon Henderson, the sunflower dress bride whose wedding had been 5 months ago, posted a photo on Saturday. It was a simple photo, the bottom tier of her wedding cake on a plate, a fork, a glass of champagne, the linen tablecloth of what appeared to be a nice anniversary restaurant. The caption said, 1 year and sneaking a slice of the cake we saved from our wedding. At Clara's Baked Goods made this, and it genuinely changed our understanding of what cake could be. Worth every penny and then some. If you're in Portland and getting married, just call her. Clara didn't see it until Sunday morning. By that point, it had 42,000 likes. She stood in her kitchen at 6 a.m. staring at her phone and trying to understand what she was looking at. The comment section was several hundred deep, people asking about her pricing in her booking calendar, whether she shipped, whether she had a website that wasn't the simple single-page thing she'd built herself 3 years ago and never properly updated. Someone had screenshotted the post and shared it on a wedding planning forum, and it had spread from there. Her email had 17 new consultation requests. She sat down on the stool in the corner of her kitchen because her legs were slightly uncertain. Then she called Maggie. 42,000 likes, Maggie said. Clara, I don't know what to do with this. You respond to every single comment. You post something today. You update your website immediately. I don't know how. I'll help. Come over. A pause. This is it, you know. This is the thing. What thing? The thing people wait for. The one time the universe decides to cooperate. Maggie's voice was warm. Don't panic. Just respond. She spent 4 hours on Sunday doing what Maggie said, responding, updating, posting a simple photo of her own, the brown butter, tart, fresh from the oven. No filter, the morning light from her ceiling window catching the caramelized edge. Caption, made in Portland. Made with everything I've got. More to come. By Sunday evening, she had 800 new followers, 19 consultation bookings, and a message from a wedding magazine in Seattle asking if she'd be interested in a feature. She sat with Lily that evening and showed her the post and let Lily read the comments. The good ones, the ones that made Lily bounce in her seat and felt for the first time in a very long time something that wasn't just survival. Something that might have been arrival. She was thinking about this, about the difference between surviving and arriving, about what it meant that she'd spent 3 years working towards something and might finally be working within it when Donovan arrived at her kitchen door on Monday evening. He knocked this time. He always knocked now. "Come in," she said. He came in. He was in a charcoal sweater instead of a suit, which was the most casual she'd seen him outside of the day he'd had his jacket off, and he had the look of someone who had come directly from wherever he'd been without stopping to recalibrate. "I saw the post," he said. Most of Portland saw the post. The consultation requests. He came to the work table, stood across from her. "You're going to need more capacity." "I know. The food hall opens in April. If we move the timeline on the basement expansion..." "Donovan," she stopped him gently. "I know. We can talk about the business logistics. I want to talk about them." She looked at him across the work table, across the space between them that had been for weeks a deliberately maintained thing. "But I also want to say Patrick told me you wanted to come on Thursday." He was quiet. "You could have come," she said. "I wasn't sure." "I know what you weren't sure of." She set down the dough scraper she'd been holding. "I want to be direct with you this way I know you prefer. I'm not a person who has a lot of room in her life for things that are unresolved. I have a daughter and a business, and both of them require clarity. So I need to know what you're doing." He held her gaze. "What I'm doing." "Yes. Are you here because of the food hall or because of me?" "It can be both, but I need to know." The kitchen was quiet except for the distant sound of the city, Portland settling into its Monday evening. "Both," he said. "You're right that it's both. But if I had to choose..." "You don't have to choose. I'm not asking you to choose." She put her palms flat on the work table, steadying herself on the solid wood. "I'm asking you to be honest about what this is." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she wondered if she'd pushed too far, asked for something he didn't have to give. "I think about this kitchen," he said finally, "when I'm not in it. I think about what you're making and whether you slept and whether Lily's arm is healing. I think about the conversation we had about your grandmother, and I think about the recipe in your apron pocket, and I think about..." He stopped. "This is not how I usually operate. I know. I'm not good at this. I know that too." She kept her voice steady. Even the way she kept her hands steady when the work was difficult. "I'm not asking you to be good at it. I'm asking you to be honest." He looked at her with those winter gray eyes, and something in him that was usually very still became for just a moment very present. Not performing, not processing, just there. "I'm here because of you," he said. "The food hall is true, and the business is true, and all of it is true. But if there were no food hall and no business, I'd still be standing in this kitchen." She breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay, okay." She picked up the dough scraper again. "Now tell me what you think about moving the expansion timeline." He blinked. Then, and it was small, just a slight softening of the controlled line of his mouth, he almost smiled. "April's tight," he said, "but possible." They talked for 2 hours about logistics, about the basement expansion and the equipment budget and the marketing strategy and the anchor tenant positioning, about what the opening should look like and whether she wanted to do a soft launch or a full event. He sat on the stool at the far end of her work table, and she moved around her kitchen the way she always did, and at some point she made tea without asking whether he wanted any and handed him a cup, and he took it without comment, and it was the most ordinary domestic thing that had happened between them, and it felt exactly right. At 9 o'clock, he said he had to go, an early meeting. She walked him to the door. "Thursday," he said, "when Lily was hurt, I wanted to be there." Patrick said, "I should have come regardless of whether it was appropriate." She looked at him. "Next time, come." He nodded, that fractional decided nod. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Donovan." She watched him go up the stairs and out the building door, and then she went back to her kitchen and stood in the middle of it with her hands in her apron pockets, the right one finding the folded recipe paper where it always was. She pressed her thumb against it once the way Gran always had. Then she went back to work. The wedding magazine feature ran 3 weeks later. It was a 4-page spread in a publication called Bloom Pacific, which Claire had never heard of, but which apparently had a readership of 200,000 engaged couples across the Pacific Northwest. They sent a photographer who spent 6 hours in the kitchen, 6 hours during which Clara had to produce everything normally while also being photographed, which was considerably more difficult than either thing done separately, and a writer who asked very good questions about craft and very delicate questions about her personal life that Clara answered with precisely as much as she chose to share. The piece was called The Baker Who Builds from Scratch. The main photograph was Clara at the work table at 7 in the morning, hair pulled back, hands deep in bread dough, the grandmother's photo visible over her shoulder. She looked in the photo like someone who had decided something. She wasn't sure when she'd decided it or what exactly she'd decided, but it was there in her face. Maggie framed it and put it in the flower shop window. "You're a local celebrity," Maggie said. "I'm a baker who got a good photo taken. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Maggie looked at the framed print with satisfaction. "Also, you look beautiful in it. Not tired beautiful, actually beautiful." "I'm always tired beautiful." "True, this is different." Maggie glanced at her sideways. "Are things different in general?" Clara considered this. Some things. Some things. Yes. "And these some things are clarifying," Clara said, slowly. Maggie made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated a great deal. "Is he coming to the food hall opening?" "He's organizing the food hall opening. It's his building." "Right, but is he coming as the landlord or as—" "I haven't thought about labels," Clara said, which was not entirely true. "We're figuring it out." What they were doing in practice was something that didn't have a name yet, but that felt in its daily texture like the beginning of something built properly. He came to the kitchen most Mondays and Fridays with legitimate business reasons that neither of them pretended were the only reason. He brought things occasionally, a book about the history of Portland's food scene, a jar of local honey from a farm he'd driven past, once an architectural plan with a handwritten note in the margin that said, "Does this work for your workflow?" She answered in writing directly on the plan, in her own rounder handwriting, next to his angular one. They talked about the building, about the food hall, about the business, and within those conversations, sideways and oblique, they talked about other things too. His father, her grandmother, the particular experience of raising a daughter alone, the specific satisfaction of being good at a thing you'd taught yourself. She did not tell Lily anything. Lily was 6 and perceptive and would make it into something with a narrative, and Clara wasn't ready for narrative yet. But on a Tuesday in late November, Lily came downstairs with Clara to check on the proofing brioche, which she did sometimes on weekends and now apparently on Tuesdays, and she stood on her step stool with her purple cast propped on the counter and looked at the grandmother's photo. "That's great-great-grandma Eleanor," Lily said. "She made the recipe in Mommy's pocket." "She did," Clara said. "Mommy always holds it when she's thinking about something hard." Clara stopped stirring. Lily was watching her with the focused attention of a child who was paying more attention than adults usually gave credit for. "Yes," Clara said. "Is she thinking about hard things a lot lately?" "Some hard things," Clara said, "and some good things. They look similar sometimes from the outside." Lily considered this. Then she nodded satisfied and asked when the brioche would be ready. Later, after Lily was in bed, Clara called Donovan. Not for a reason, just called. He answered on the second ring. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said. I don't know, nothing's wrong." A pause, then all right. She could hear him settling whatever he'd been doing, adjusting to make room for the call. The small sound of him being present. "Lily asked me today if I was thinking about something hard," she said. "She's very perceptive." "You've raised her well." "She raised herself mostly. I just kept the lights on." She sat down on the kitchen stool. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The first time you came back to the building, late alone, with the flashlight." She'd thought about this many times. "What were you looking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "I always walk properties alone after the crew leaves. I look for what the plans don't show." "And what did you find?" "Someone who'd built a life in a basement," he said, very carefully, very intentionally, without a lot of support. A pause. "I found the cake fragment on the parchment." "And you ate it?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know," he said. "It seemed like the honest thing to do." She turned this over in her mind. The honest thing to do, eating a stranger's leftover cake at midnight in a dark kitchen because it was there and it was real, and pretending otherwise would have been some small dishonesty. She understood that. It was the same reason she told people the truth even when the truth was complicated. The same reason she'd asked him directly what he was doing instead of waiting and wondering. Honesty as a form of respect for the thing itself, whatever it was. "Donovan," she said. "Yes." The expansion, the larger kitchen space. If I'm going to be ready for April, I need the build-out to start in January. I know. I'll make sure it does. Thank you. A pause. And also, yes, she looked at the grandmother's photo on the wall. Thank you for the Earl Grey, she said, the first time, before everything else. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she'd said something wrong. Then, you're welcome, he said. I noticed you always made tea in the morning. I thought it should be good tea. She pressed her thumb against the recipe paper in her pocket. It was, she said. They talked for another hour about nothing in particular, the construction schedule, a book she'd been reading, whether the holiday market in Pioneer Square was worth the parking. Ordinary things. The kind of ordinary things that were the actual material of a life, the part that the big moments got built on top of. She went to bed late and slept better than she had in weeks. December brought the holiday orders, and with them, the reality of what 42,000 Instagram likes translated to, in practical terms, too much work. She was doing 16-hour days. She had to. She'd taken on 12 new clients from the Post, all of them with events in December and January. And while she'd been appropriately selective about what she said yes to, she'd still said yes to more than she could comfortably manage. She'd hired Maggie's niece, Kara, 3 days a week to handle deliveries and some prep work, which helped but not enough. She didn't sleep enough. She didn't eat enough of anything that wasn't leftover testing rounds from batches she was evaluating. She lost 4 pounds between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and Ruth noticed and looked at her with the quiet concern that Ruth always used to express the things she didn't say outright. You're doing too much, Ruth said on a Tuesday. I'm building something, Clara said. You were always building something. You're allowed to build it at a sustainable pace. The food hall opens in April. Clara. Ruth's voice was gentle. Ben. Ruth. I know you don't want me to say it. Then please don't. Silence. Ruth folded her hands in her lap the way she did when she was swallowing something. Lily was in the other room with her toys, the purple cast, now just a memory it had come off 2 weeks ago, and she'd spent 20 minutes petting her own arm like a recovered stranger. He would have worried about you, Ruth said finally. That's all. He would have worried. I know. Clara looked at her mother-in-law's hands, the same hands that had held Ben's, that had the same square shape as Ben's that Lily had inherited in miniature. I worry about myself sometimes too, and then I go back to work because that's what I know how to do. I know, Ruth said. I just want you to know there are people who can help. You don't have to hold it all. Clara sat with this. She had been holding it all for 3 years, not because she didn't have support, but because accepting help had always felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit, that she was stretched, that she was sometimes in the small, dark hours frightened. I know there are people, she said. I'm getting better at knowing that. Ruth looked at her for a moment with those Ben eyes. Good, she said. And then, is it that developer, the one from the building? Clara looked at her. Lily mentioned a man with dark hair who brought noodles, Ruth said, and that he was nice to her cast. That was his brother, actually. Oh? Ruth waited. His brother is easier, Clara said. Donovan Mr. Ashford is more complicated. Are most things worth having easy? Clara thought about Donovan Ashford standing at the bottom of her basement stairs with his jacket off, saying, I think about this kitchen when I'm not in it. She thought about the Earl Grey tea on the stair. She thought about a flashlight and a cake fragment and the honest thing to do. No, she said, I suppose they're not. By Christmas, she had survived the holiday rush and come out the other side with her financials better than they'd ever been. She was on track to triple her previous year's revenue. The kitchen expansion was scheduled to begin January 7th. The food hall marketing materials had her name at the top, Clara's opening spring 2025. It was hers. She'd built it. Every inch of it, every client, every sleepless night and early morning, and decision made alone at a kitchen table, it was hers. On Christmas Eve, after Lily went to sleep, she sat in her kitchen with a glass of wine and looked at the grandmother's photo on the wall. Grand, she thought, I'm here. I think I'm finally here. She took the recipe paper out of her pocket and unfolded it for the first time in months. Just looked at the handwriting, the careful loops and precise measurements in her grandmother's particular script. The paper was worn at the folds, soft as cloth from years of handling. She had her kitchen. She had her daughter. She had slowly and carefully and without any promises yet, the beginnings of something else. She folded the recipe back and put it in her pocket. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She slept until 7, which was the longest she'd slept in 3 months. The Serena problem arrived on a Wednesday in January. The expansion construction had started the week before a controlled chaos of demolition and new framing that required Clara to relocate some of her equipment temporarily and work around a constantly shifting layout. And she was in a focused, slightly ragged state when she heard footsteps coming down the basement stairs that were neither Donovan's nor Kwan's. The woman who appeared was somewhere in her late 30s, elegant in a way that looked effortless, but certainly wasn't with the self-possessed bearing of someone who'd spent years in rooms where presence was currency. She was wearing a camel coat, and she held a coffee from the same artisan place on Division Street, where Patrick always went, and she looked at the kitchen, at the equipment for wrapped in plastic at the half-demolished west wall at Clara, in her apron with flour on her wrist, with cool, appraising eyes. "You must be Clara Whitfield," she said. "I'm Serena Aldrich. Don and I have worked together for years." Clara looked at her. "Have you?" "I'm corporate counsel. I've handled most of his major acquisitions." She came farther in, looking around without being invited to, with the ease of someone who went where she chose. "He mentioned the food hall project. It's ambitious." "It is." "He mentioned you." Serena looked at her directly. "He hasn't mentioned someone in a while. I thought I should come and see." Clara set down her dough scraper very deliberately. "See what exactly, whether you're good for him." Serena said it without malice, or if there was malice, it was very controlled, very professional. "I know that sounds... I don't mean it unkindly. I've watched Don for 8 years. I watched his marriage fall apart because he can't let himself be present with people. And then I've watched him the last 2 months become someone I almost don't recognize. Someone who leaves work before 7 and makes phone calls that aren't about business and smiles at things on his phone." Clara was quiet. "I just want to know," Serena said, "whether you're someone who's going to be worth that, whether you see what he's actually offering." It was not a threat. Clara was very certain it wasn't a threat, because if it had been a threat, she'd have known exactly what to do with it. It was something stranger, a kind of possessive care from a woman who had apparently spent years watching Donovan Ashford not be present with anyone and was trying badly to protect him from the possibility of that changing. "I appreciate that you care about him," Clara said. "But what you're doing right now is coming into my kitchen and auditing me, and I'm going to ask you not to do that." Serena blinked. "I'm not competing for anything," Clara said. "I don't do that. If Donovan wants to be here, he'll be here. If he doesn't, he won't. That's between us, not between you and me." She held the woman's gaze steadily. "And I'd ask you to remember that this is my workspace, and I'm in the middle of a build that I've been planning for years, and your presence here is not something I invited." Serena looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, not quite respect, but the precursor to it, the moment of recognition. "He was right," Serena said quietly. "You don't perform anything." "No," Clara said, "I don't." Serena left without another word. Clara stood in the middle of her disrupted kitchen and breathed for a moment. Then she picked up her dough scraper and went back to work. That evening, she called Donovan. "Your friend Serena came to see me today," she said. A pause. "I know. She texted me afterward." Another pause longer. "I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to..." "You don't need to apologize for what she did." Clara leaned against her kitchen counter. "But I'd like you to know that whatever is or isn't happening between us is ours, not anyone else's to assess or protect or manage." "I know that." "Good." She held the phone. Outside, January rain tapped against the window. "She said you smile at things on your phone." He was quiet for a moment. "I might," he said. Clara closed her eyes. "Donovan," she said. "Yes. Stop waiting for permission. I'm not issuing it, and you don't need it." A pause. "Whatever you're doing, just do it. Show up. Be there. That's all I've ever wanted from anyone." The line was quiet for a long time. "All right," he said. "Good night." "Good night, Clara." She hung up and sat with the quiet for a moment. Then her phone buzzed with a text, just 3 words. "You're remarkable, you know." She looked at it for a long time. Then she typed back, "Don't tell me, show me," and set her phone down and smiled at the kitchen ceiling, just briefly, just to herself before she went to check on Lily. He showed up. That was the thing that surprised her most. Not that he'd said he would, but that he actually did consistently without drama. No grand gestures, no declarations in doorways. Just he showed up. He came on a Tuesday evening with no reason stated and helped carry equipment back from temporary storage when the west wall was done, moving the deck oven with the contractor in a way that suggested he'd done physical work before at some point in his life and not forgotten how. He didn't take his jacket off until they were halfway through, and then he rolled up his sleeves, and Clara didn't look at this exactly. She was aware of it. He came on a Thursday when she had an urgent problem with a sugar delivery that arrived wrong. The wrong grain too coarse for the delicate work she needed it for, and stood in the kitchen while she called 3 suppliers trying to find a solution. And when she found one, he drove across town himself to pick it up because it was faster than waiting for a courier. He was back in 45 minutes with the sugar, which he set on her work table as if it were the most ordinary thing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You were on a deadline," he said. This was the fastest solution. It was practical. It was also the kind of attention that had no name, yet the very specific awareness of someone's needs, and the immediate impulse to address them not as a performance of generosity, but as the most efficient possible response. She was paying attention. She just didn't say all of it. On a Friday in late January, he stayed late, past 9, past the time when the reasonable explanation of business kept the evening from being something else. They were talking about the food hall marketing plan. She had opinions about the language they were using, which was too corporate, too impersonal, and somewhere around 8:45, the conversation shifted from the food hall to something else. She wasn't entirely sure when. "What made you get into real estate development?" she asked. She'd wondered for months. He leaned against the far work table with his arms crossed, a posture she'd come to read as him thinking carefully rather than guarding. "My father built houses, actual physical houses. He was a contractor. He had a particular belief about what a building was. Not real estate, not square footage. A specific kind of shelter." He paused. "When he died and I took over the company, I wanted to build things that had that quality. Things people would be in for years and feel anchored by." "Do you always succeed at that?" "No. Direct, unhedged. Sometimes the commercial pressure wins, sometimes the investors win. I've built things I'm proud of and things I'm not, and I've gotten better at knowing which is which before I start." She thought about her kitchen, about how Harold's building had become in Donovan's hands, something that felt like possibility rather than loss. "What is this building going to be?" she asked. "I think it's going to be something people are in for years," he said. "I think it's going to be the kind of place where," he paused, "where things actually happen, that aren't just commercial transactions." She looked at him. He was looking at her. "Is that what you meant to build when you bought it?" she asked. "Not exactly," he said. "It became that." She turned back to the marketing materials spread on the work table, gave herself a moment. "The language on page 3, she said. "The bit about artisanal food experiences. Can we take that out? People who eat food don't say food experience. They say they ate something. They say it was good." "Agreed," he said and picked up a pen. They worked until 9:45. When he left, he stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment, and she stood at her work table, and they were briefly just 2 people in a kitchen at the end of a day, and neither of them made it into something it wasn't yet. But it was getting closer to something. She could feel the shape of it. The baking lesson was Lily's idea. This was important to establish because Clara would not have suggested it herself. Lily had seen Donovan at the building twice now, once when he'd come to talk about the expansion, and Clara hadn't had childcare, and once when he'd driven her home after a meeting ran late and Lily was in the car. Both times Lily had assessed him with the frank intensity of a 6-year-old who hadn't learned yet to pretend she wasn't looking. Her verdict delivered privately to Clara. "He's very quiet, but not the scary kind of quiet, the thinking kind." Clara had agreed that this was an accurate characterization. "Can he make something?" Lily asked on a Saturday morning. "What do you mean?" "In the kitchen. Can he help?" Lily was eating toast with the focused attention she brought to all food-related activities. "You always say everyone should know how to make things." "I do say that. So can he come?" Clara looked at her daughter and thought about what she was asking and what she wasn't asking and what the answer to both questions was. She texted Donovan, "Lily wants to know if you'd like to come make something on Saturday afternoon." Low stakes. She's the one asking. His response came in 4 minutes, "I'll be there at 2. She told Lily, who received this information with the quiet satisfaction of a child who had arranged exactly what she'd intended to arrange all along. He arrived at 2 with a small bunch of flowers ranunculus, because she'd told him once that they were her favorite, and apparently he'd remembered, in a bottle of vanilla extract which she took as evidence, that someone had told him you always brought something when you came to someone's kitchen. "These are the right flowers," Lily told him, examining the ranunculus critically. "Mommy likes these." "Good to know," Donovan said. "Do you know how to make anything?" "Not much." That's okay, we'll teach you. Lily led him into the kitchen with the authority of a very small general, pointing out the work table and the apron hooks in the stool he should sit on. You have to wear an apron or you get flour on your shirt. He put on an apron. Clara watched this happen. He tied it very precisely behind him, which suggested the apron was more difficult for him than it appeared, and he stood in the kitchen looking almost uncertain, which was not an expression she'd seen on him before and which she found unexpectedly charming. We're making shortbread, Lily announced. I'm the sugar person. What does that mean? He asked. I measure the sugar. Lily was already on her step stool. I always measure the sugar because I know exactly how much. Mommy says I have a good eye. She does, Clara confirmed. They made shortbread. It took an hour because Lily narrated every step at length and corrected Donovan twice on his butter incorporation technique and asked him 4 unrelated questions in the middle of creaming the butter about whether he had a dog. Why not? Was it because of the apartment? Could you have a dog in an apartment? She had a friend with an apartment dog, and it seemed fine. He answered all of this with complete seriousness. Clara stood back more than she needed to because the sight of him, this man who was exactly certain of himself in every professional context she'd watched him navigate, following a 6-year-old's instructions with focused and genuine attention, was something she needed a moment to simply observe. He wasn't performing patience, he was just patient. The way he was just attentive and just present because those were actual qualities rather than behaviors he deployed strategically. She thought, oh, not for the first time, but more clearly than before. The shortbread tape came out slightly uneven because Donovan had cut his with more confidence than precision, which Lily pointed out, but they were golden and fragrant and exactly right. And Lily arranged them on a plate and gave him 2 of his own misshapen ones to eat first, which she said was fair. He ate them, standing at the work table, and Clara watched him eat her grandmother's shortbread recipe, and she felt something move in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not need, not fear, not the complicated grief-adjacent longing she sometimes felt when she was tired and the kitchen was late-night quiet. Something simpler and more difficult than all of those. These are good, he said. You helped, Lily said generously. Minimally. Still, Clara started cleaning up because motion was easier than standing still with the feeling. After the shortbread, Lily showed him the crayon drawings she'd been making of the food hall, elaborately imagined with enormous cakes in the windows and people in the doorway who all had round smiling faces, and he looked at each one with the same attention he brought to architectural plans, which was the right way to look at a child's drawings, as if they mattered because the person who made them mattered. At 5:30, he said he needed to go. Lily hugged him around the middle without being invited to, which made Clara hold her breath for a moment, but he put a hand on Lily's head with a steadiness that suggested he was not at all undone by it. Come back, Lily said. I will, he said. He looked at Clara over Lily's head, and something moved between them that was too early for a name but too real to be nothing. She walked him out. At the door in the November dark, he turned to her. Thank you, he said, for today. Lily organized it. I know. He looked at her steadily. I know Lily organized it. I'm thanking you. She held his gaze. The street was wet, the Portland evening damp and leaf-smelling, the light from the building's new sign catching in his gray eyes. She had been alone for 3 years. She had built something from nothing and held herself together with the particular engineering of a woman who'd learned that strength was mostly just habit showing up every day and doing the work, and the work accumulated into something that looked like strength from the outside. She'd been proud of that. She was still proud of that. She was also very tired of sleeping alone in a house that smelled like flour and quiet. She stepped forward, just slightly, into the space between them that had been carefully maintained. She put her hand on his arm just for a moment, just the pressure of her palm against his jacket sleeve. Good night, Donovan, she said. He covered her hand with his, briefly, solid and warm. Good night, he said. He walked down the steps. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. She went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The following Monday, he came in the evening, not for a reason she could name, and they sat at her kitchen table, and he told her about his marriage. He told it the way he told things, clean, unsparing, with the particular honesty of someone who'd worked out what the truth was and had no interest in revising it. He and his ex-wife, whose name was Clara, had noted this coincidence. He did not comment on it, had married young. By his standards, he was 31, and she was 29, and they'd been happy in the early years. Or he'd thought they were happy. Looking back, he could see that she'd been waiting for him to turn toward her in some fundamental way, and he'd kept turning toward the work instead, not because he didn't care about her, but because he didn't know how to be in two places at once, and the work was always legible in a way that relationships weren't. Legible was the word he used. She thought it was exactly the right word. She left on a Thursday, he said. She'd been thinking about it for months, apparently. She told me she'd been leaving slowly for a year and I hadn't noticed. He looked at his hands on the table. She was right. I hadn't noticed. Did you miss her when she left? I missed the version of our life I'd imagined we were living. He paused. That's different from missing a person. Clara thought about this. Is it? Yes. Missing the imagined version is about you, about what you wanted the life to be. Missing the actual person is about them. It took me a while to understand which one I was doing. And now I understand that I failed her in a specific way that was about not being present, not turning toward. I didn't know how to do that then. I don't know if I know how now. He looked at her, but I'm more aware of what it requires. She held his gaze. What does it require? Actually looking, he said, noticing things, showing up for reasons that aren't efficient. Are you here for an efficient reason tonight? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I know, she said. She got up and refilled their tea. She did this without asking if he wanted more, because she'd learned that he always wanted more. He just didn't ask for things unless asked directly. She set his cup back in front of him and sat down. I was married once too, she said. Not really. I was together with someone once. Ben, Lily's father. She talked about Ben before in fragments. She'd never told the whole shape of it. He was a good man, genuinely. He was kind in ways that didn't require anything from you. He was just kind as a property of himself. And I loved him in the way that's easy to love someone like that. Uncomplicated. Or it seemed uncomplicated. She looked at the table. After he died, I realized that a lot of the uncomplicatedness was because I hadn't needed anything harder from him. We were good together in good times. I don't know what we would have been in hard ones. You had hard ones. After he died, but not before, not really. We were young and building things and optimistic, and it was all in front of us. She pressed her thumb against the recipe paper in her pocket. I've spent 3 years wondering if what we had was real or if it was just easy. And then I felt terrible for wondering. It's a legitimate question, he said. It doesn't feel legitimate. It feels disloyal. Those aren't the same. She looked at him. The kitchen was quiet, warm the way it always was at 10 at night when the day was almost done. The construction sounds had stopped hours ago. Outside, January rain tapped softly at the ceiling window. I know, she said. I'm learning they're not. He reached across this table. He didn't take her hand. He just placed his hand flat on the table nearby. Open present, not asking for anything, just available. She looked at his hand, then she put hers next to it, not quite touching, adjacent. They sat like that for a while, talking about other things, the food hall, his plans for the upper floors, a book she'd been reading, whether she thought the brown butter tart or the lemon cardamom was the right signature item for the opening. Ordinary things. The hands didn't move. At 11, he said he had to go. He said it with the quality of someone who would have preferred not to need to, and she heard that. He stood at the door. Clara, he said. Yes. If you're willing, I'd like to stop being careful and start being something else. She looked at him. What else? Whatever this is. He said it with the careful honesty of someone who meant exactly what they said. I don't have a better word yet, but I'd like to find out. She held his gaze. The man who'd walked into her building as a problem and become over 3 months something so entirely different that she could no longer find the original version of him in her memory. All right, she said. All right. Yes. She almost smiled. You can stop waiting. He nodded, that particular nod that meant something was decided. He left. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment in the warm kitchen, in the quiet of a decision made. Then Lily called from upstairs, a sleepy, disoriented mommy that meant she'd woken from a dream and wanted confirmation that the world was intact. I'm here, Clara called back. Go back to sleep. A pause, then the small sound of Lily settling. Clara went upstairs to check on her the way she always did, the way she'd always do the first check and the last check and everything in between. This was her life. This was what she was building. It had room in it now for more than she'd thought. February. Portland had the particular quality in February. of a city that had made peace with its own gray, not unhappy, just inhabited the rain soft and steady, and the coffee shops full of people who had learned to treat weather as a background condition rather than an obstacle. Clara had always liked February for this reason. It felt honest. The kitchen expansion was finished and on the 14th Valentine's Day, which Kwan pointed out with deadpan humor, having apparently developed a dry wit over the 4 months of their professional relationship. The new space was 30% larger with a second deck oven, improved ventilation, proper cold storage, and a prep station that didn't require her to pivot constantly to reach what she needed. It was not everything she'd eventually want, but it was far more than what she'd had, and she stood in the middle of it on the morning it opened and breathed. Gran's photo was the first thing she put up, in the same spot as always over the proofing station, looking out over the whole room. Donovan came by in the afternoon with Kwan to see the finished space. He walked it the way he walked at all his properties, attentive and methodical, asking specific questions about the drainage and the ventilation before he asked anything else. She watched him go through his process and thought about how she'd first found this impersonal and now understood it as a form of care. You looked at the structure first because that was what held everything up. "It's good work," he said when he'd finished. To Kwan, the contractors did well. Then to Clara, "You added the second shelf above the proofing station." She'd specified it in the plans. She hadn't realized he'd read that carefully. "The height works better for my workflow." "I know. I saw how you used the old one." She looked at him. He'd been watching her workflow carefully enough to notice what height she preferred for her proofing shelf, and he'd had it built accordingly. She didn't know what to do with that except to file it in the accumulating record of small attentions that were beginning to add up to something she recognized. "Thank you," she said. "It's your kitchen," he said. "It should work for you." Kwan looked at the ceiling with great interest and then stepped out to check something about the drainage. Donovan looked at her. "Friday," he said, "if you're free, not business." She held his gaze. "Not business. Dinner, not here. Something that doesn't involve either of us working. I'll need to arrange for Lily." "Of course." A pause. "If you'd rather bring her." "Next time," Clara said, and then realized what she'd implied by saying next time, which meant she'd assumed there would be a next time before this time had happened, which was presumptuous. She didn't take it back. He almost smiled. "Friday." "Friday," she said. Kwan came back in from the drainage inspection, looking at his clipboard, and they resumed the professional conversation, and Clara went back to work, and the kitchen smelled like new wood and old flour, and the particular possibility of something just beginning. Dinner on Friday was at a small Italian place in Selwood that she'd been wanting to try for 2 years and never had because you didn't take a 6-year-old to a place with tablecloths, and because going alone seemed like too much effort for a weeknight. Ruth had taken Lily with the particular cheerfulness of someone who knew she was being given a reason to have her granddaughter overnight. Clara wore a dress she'd bought 2 years ago and worn twice. Not a performance, just an acknowledgement that the evening was different from her mornings in the kitchen. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, at the small, permanent marks of her work. The faded burn scar on her left forearm from a rack, the rough patches on her palms, the way she habitually held her hair back that had given her a posture. She looked like someone who worked with her hands and didn't apologize for it. She thought that was fine. He was there when she arrived, already seated, jacket on, but unbuttoned, which was the most relaxed she'd seen him in public. He stood when she came in, always stood, which remained one of those small courtesies she couldn't dismiss. Dinner was to her mild surprise easy. Not performing ease actually easy, the way conversations were easy when neither person was working too hard at them. They talked about his father's houses, the specific ones, what had been good about them architecturally. She told him about a summer she'd spent at 18 working in a bakery in the Oregon coast town where her parents had a vacation cottage, how that summer had been when she understood that bread had a logic to it that other things didn't. He told her about the first building his company had developed that he was genuinely proud of, a renovated warehouse in Tacoma that had become a community art space, not particularly profitable, not the kind of project his board had been enthusiastic about, but right. "You kept it anyway?" she asked. "Sometimes you keep things because they're right rather than because they make sense," he said. She looked at him over her wineglass. He was looking at her in a way that was not about the Tacoma art space. "Yes," she said, "sometimes you do." After dinner, they walked along the river for a while because Portland was still and damp and beautiful in that February way, and neither of them was ready for the evening to end. He didn't take her hand, but he walked close enough that their sleeves brushed occasionally, which was perhaps more intimate than hand-holding because it was less deliberate. At her car, they stopped. She turned to face him. The street light was orange and wet-looking, the river dark behind it, the city quiet. "I'd like to do this again," she said. "Next week," he said. "Next week." She paused. "And in between next week, you can stop by the kitchen. If you want to. You don't need a reason anymore." He looked at her. "I've been coming without a reason for months." "I know," she said, "but now you don't have to pretend you have one." He almost laughed. It was the closest she'd seen him to laughing, a breath, a slight shift in his whole face. She stood on her toes and kissed him on the cheek. Brief, warm, deliberate. The stubble against her lips for just a moment. He went very still. She stepped back. "Good night, Donovan." "Good night," he said, with the quality of someone who had needed a moment to locate his voice. She got in her car and drove home. She picked up Lily the next morning and made breakfast and didn't tell anyone anything yet because some things needed to stay quiet for a while before they were ready to be said out loud. But she was smiling. She was definitely smiling. March came in on the rush of food hall preparations, and everything became simultaneously more exciting and more stressful in the particular combination that Clara had come to recognize as her natural habitat. She hired 2 more people, a part-time pastry assistant named Ravi, who had trained at a culinary school in San Francisco and had the hands for delicate work, and Karamaggi's niece was now full-time. The kitchen ran 3 shifts. She was developing a full cafe menu in addition to her wedding and event business. She was working 12-hour days again, but different 12-hour days, productive rather than desperate, building towards something rather than maintaining against collapse. She and Donovan had been to dinner twice more. He'd come by the kitchen 6 times without a business reason. Lily had made a drawing of him that he'd asked if he could keep, and Clara had watched him fold it carefully and put it in his jacket's inside pocket, where she knew from his own words he kept his father's watch. She had not kissed him again. She was taking her time with this, not from fear, but from the particular knowledge that some things were better built slowly, and that she had learned to trust her instincts about pace, even when impatience said otherwise. On the Thursday, 2 weeks before the food hall opening, he came to the kitchen at 7 in the evening and found her in the middle of a complete meltdown about the cafe menu signage, which had been printed with 2 typos and was arriving tomorrow morning and needed to be corrected before the soft launch. He looked at the situation, the proofs, the timeline, the printer's unhelpful response, and said, "Who's your contact at the printer?" She gave him the number. He made 1 call. The signage would be reprinted and delivered by 8 a.m. She didn't ask how. "You pulled a favor," she said. "I've used that printer for 15 years, he said, and they made a mistake. Those are 2 different things." She looked at him across the work table in the way she did sometimes, trying to understand the fullness of who he was, which was a thing she was still in the middle of doing and expected to be in the middle of for a long time. That was all right. She had time. "Donovan," she said. "Yes, I'm glad you walked into this building." He was quiet for a moment. "So am I," he said. "More than I can say, actually." She nodded, turned back to the proofs. "I'll be done in an hour," she said. "Stay if you want." He got the stool from the corner and sat down, and she worked, and he stayed. Outside, Portland put on its March face the first tentative suggestions of green, the rain softening slightly the particular promise of a season that was not quite here, but was clearly coming. In the kitchen, Clara Whitfield worked and was watched, and she thought, this is what I was building toward. All of it. The kitchen and the work and the daughter and this man sitting on a stool who didn't need to say anything, because saying wasn't the only way to mean something. She worked. He stayed. That was enough. That was everything. Patrick came to see her on the last Tuesday of March. It wasn't unusual for Patrick to come by. He checked in on the food hall project regularly and occasionally showed up with coffee for no professional reason at all. But this time he had a particular expression, something between pleased and cautious that made her look at him more carefully. "Don wants to do something," he said, "for the opening. He wants your name on the outside of the building." She set down her pastry brush. "My name." "Clara's, on the exterior sign, the whole building, not just the food hall." He held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say. It's his building." "It is, but he says the building should be known for what it actually is, and what it actually is, what makes it worth knowing, is what you built in the basement." Patrick sat on the edge of a work table. He's not doing it to be generous. He's doing it because he thinks it's accurate. She was quiet for a long time. The kitchen hummed around her, the second oven running, Robbie working at the prep station, the sound of the street above. Clara's, she said. He showed me the mock-ups. It looks good. The sign is understated. He wouldn't do anything that wasn't understated, but it's there. She thought about a woman who'd driven across Portland at 4 in the morning for 3 years, who'd built a kitchen out of savings and stubbornness, who'd signed a lease in a parking lot feeling proud and slightly bereft, who'd been left a tin of tea on a stair with no note. Tell him yes, she said. You could tell him yourself. I know, she said. Tell him yes from me and tell him I'll say thank you in person. Patrick smiled. He's going to do that thing where he says it was purely a practical decision. I know. And you're going to see through that. I always do. Patrick finished his coffee and stood. He's good for you, he said. I want you to know, as someone who's known him for 36 years, I think this version of him is the real one. The other version, the one who was just at work, always at work, that was the incomplete one. She looked at him. I know, she said quietly. I think you're right. After Patrick left, she went back to her pastry work and thought about the sign and what it meant to have your name on something you'd built. She thought about Gran's name on the trophy from 1987. Eleanor Whitfield first place. She thought, we're still here, Gran. We're still making things. The recipe paper was in her apron pocket where it always was. She reached in and pressed her thumb to it once gently, and then she went back to work. The food hall crisis arrived on a Tuesday 12 days before opening. Clara came in at 5 in the morning to find a notice taped to the building's front door. Official city letterhead, Community Development Division, informing Ashford Holdings that the property's development permit was under review, pending a formal objection filed by the Southeast Portland Neighborhood Association. The objection cited concerns about parking impact, commercial traffic density, and the phrase that made Clara read it twice, the displacement of community-serving neighborhood character in favor of upscale commercial development. She read it standing on the sidewalk in the dark, her breath visible in the March air, and she felt something cold that wasn't the temperature. She called Donovan. He answered in 3 rings, which meant he'd been awake. I just got the email from Quan, he said. The notice is on the door. I know. A pause. It's not automatically a block. They file a formal objection. We respond. There's a hearing. The process takes how long? If they expedite, 2 weeks. If they don't, 6 to 8. The opening is in 12 days. I know. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. The city was very quiet. A delivery truck rumbled by on Hawthorne, its headlights sweeping across the building's new sign, Clara's, in clean, understated letters above the door just installed last week. Clara's, her name, right there. I'm going to call the attorney, he said. We'll file our response today. I have documentation of the traffic study, the community benefit agreements, the local vendor commitments. The parking objection is legitimate, she said. I know it is. We're adding foot traffic to this block, and the neighborhood has limited parking. The mitigations are on paper. People who live here know what they actually experience. She was thinking while she talked the way she thought better out loud in motion. Donovan, who filed the objection. A pause. The SEPNA board. I don't know specifically who brought it forward. Find out, she said, and get me whatever documentation you have. The traffic study, the vendor agreements, the hiring data, all of it. I want everything. What are you going to do? She looked at her name on the building. She thought about the Henderson cake and 42,000 likes in a magazine feature and a new kitchen and a signed lease. She thought about 3 years of 4 a.m. mornings in one bad month being the difference between existing and not existing. She thought about her grandmother's recipe in her pocket and Gran's face over the proofing station. I'm going to go to the hearing, she said. Clara, I have lawyers who... I know you do. I'm not asking you to send me instead of them. I'm telling you I'm going to be there. A pause. This is my building. My name is on it. I'm going to be there. Silence. Then, I'll have Quan send you everything we have by noon. Thank you. She hung up and went inside. She made bread. She made it the way she always made it when things were hard, the long ferment sourdough that required full attention, that you couldn't rush or multitask through, that rewarded patience with a crust that cracked cleanly and a crumb that was exactly right. She lost herself in it for 2 hours, and when she came out the other side, the sun was coming up and the kitchen smelled like every good morning she'd ever worked through. Ravi arrived at 7, and she told him what had happened and told him the schedule would continue as planned because they were going to open in 12 days, because she'd decided that. He looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said, with the simplicity of someone who believed her. She took that and kept it. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening, 10 days before the opening. Clara spent 3 days preparing, not in the way she'd prepared her business proposal for Donovan, no spreadsheets, no revenue projections. Instead, she read. She read everything she could find about the SEPNA objection, about the specific concerns about the 15 people who'd signed the formal complaint. She read neighborhood association meeting minutes from the last 3 years, looking for what this community had been asking for and not getting, and then looking for where the food hall either addressed or missed those things. She found gaps. She also found arguments she hadn't thought to make. Maggie helped. Maggie had been at neighborhood association meetings for 4 years. She'd been the loudest voice in the room at the one where they'd originally met, and she knew the players. Harriet Dunmore filed the lead objection, Maggie said. She's been on the SEPNA board for 12 years. She's not unreasonable. She's actually fought for a lot of good things in this neighborhood. She's worried about what happened on the west side when the boutique development went in 6 locally owned businesses gone in 18 months. That's a legitimate worry, Clara said. It is. Maggie looked at her. What are you going to say? I'm going to say the truth. Clara looked at her notes. I'm going to say I've been here for 3 years. I'm going to say I almost lost this kitchen 4 months ago. I'm going to say that the reason I'm still here is that someone believed this space could be built around what was already in it, not built over what was already here. And then I'm going to say what the agreements actually say and ask them to look at what they're trying to protect and whether this serves that or not. And the parking, I'm going to acknowledge it's a real problem. And I'm going to propose the specific mitigation that's in the traffic study, and I'm going to ask them what else they need to see. Maggie was quiet. You're not going to argue. No, you're going to listen to them argue and then address it directly. Yes, Maggie looked at her. That's a more sophisticated political strategy than most people would use. It's not political strategy, Clara said. It's just honest. They have real concerns. The real answer to real concerns is to address them, not to out-argue them. She paused. Also, I'm bringing Lily. Maggie stared at her. To the planning hearing. Lily lives in this neighborhood. This is her community too. And she is 6 years old and she has a purple cast and Clara looked at her notes. She is extremely credible. Maggie's mouth twitched. You're bringing your daughter as a character witness. I'm bringing my daughter because she should know what it looks like when her mother shows up for something. Clara closed the notebook. And yes, also because she's 6 and has a cast. The hearing was held in the community room of the Woodstock Branch Library, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, the particular municipal smell of old carpet and meeting agendas. Clara sat in the second row with Lily beside her. Lily in her good sweater, with the owls on it, rabbit tucked under her arm, looking at the room with the alert curiosity she brought to all new environments. Ruth had come too, which Clara hadn't asked for, but hadn't refused. Maggie was there, and 3 of her regular clients who'd called asking if they could come when word got out through the wedding planning community, and Shannon Henderson, who had driven from Lake Oswego in her nice car and was wearing the sunflower yellow that seemed to be her signature color. Donovan was in the back row. He'd told her he'd be there. He hadn't told her where he'd sit, and when she turned and saw him quietly in the last row alone, no Quan, no lawyer beside him, she understood what he was doing. He was there for her, not for the development. He'd put himself in the back so she would be the one who filled the front. She turned back around. The SEP in a board chair called the hearing to order. The objections were read formally, parking impact traffic density displacement concerns. 3 members of the neighborhood association spoke, including Harriet Dunmore, who was in her 60s and spoke with the measured cadence of someone who had been at a lot of hearings and had learned to make her point without dramatics. She made good points. Clara listened to all of them. When it was time, Clara stood. She was not a practiced public speaker. She didn't have slides or notes. She had a single page she'd written out the night before and revised until it felt honest and then stopped revising. My name is Clara Whitfield, she said. I've been a tenant in this building for 3 years. I'm a baker. I specialize in wedding cakes and pastry, and I run a 1-woman business recently, 2.5 people out of the basement kitchen at this address. She looked at the board. I want to start by saying that the concerns you've raised are real. The parking situation on this block is genuinely strained, and adding foot traffic will make that real. I'm not here to tell you that that's not true. I'm here to show you what I think you're actually trying to protect, and then ask you whether what's being built here serves that or undermines it. She unfolded the paper. You want neighborhood businesses that belong to the neighborhood. Businesses run by people who live here or have been here, who are part of the community in a way that a national chain or a boutique import never is. You want commerce that creates local employment and puts money into local hands and gives the neighborhood character rather than erasing it. She paused. I am that. I have been that for 3 years, and the food hall that's being built around my kitchen is designed to extend that for additional vendors, all local, all with existing neighborhood histories, all with 5-year leases at rates structured to allow them to actually survive. She put the paper down. This isn't a chain. This isn't a boutique development parachuting in. My name is on that building, my actual name. Because the person who invested in this project believes that what I built in that basement is what makes the building worth knowing about. She looked at Harriet Dunmore directly. You asked in your objection whether this development serves the existing community or replaces it. My answer is I am the existing community. I've been here. I'm going to be there. And I'd like you to look at what I've done with that kitchen and tell me whether the neighborhood is better or worse for it. She sat down. Lily patted her arm. Good job, Mommy, she said at a volume that was audible to the front several rows. Several people in the room smiled. The board deliberated for 45 minutes. Clara sat with Lily's head leaning against her arm and didn't talk to anyone. Ruth came and sat with them partway through. Didn't say anything. Just sat. Maggie hovered nearby with the energy of someone who couldn't sit still, which was fine. Donovan didn't move from the back row. The chair called the room to order and announced the vote 5-2 in favor of approving the development. The parking mitigation plan was approved with a condition that required the food hall to fund one additional signage upgrade for the residential street adjacent to the building, which Clara thought was completely reasonable and said so when asked. Harriet Dunmore came and found her afterward while Lily was showing Shannon Henderson's husband the owls on her sweater. You made a good case, Dunmore said. She was smaller than she'd seemed at the podium, a practical-looking woman with sharp eyes and reading glasses pushed up on her head. I still voted no. I know, I appreciated your points about the displacement pattern. They were real. They are real. I hope we prove the pattern doesn't apply here. Clara held her hand out. If you see things that concern you, call me. Directly, not the city office me. Dunmore looked at her for a moment. Then she shook the hand. I might do that. Good. Clara gathered Lily and said goodbye to Shannon and hugged Maggie, who said I told you several times, into her shoulder, and walked through the library's community room toward the exit. Donovan was waiting near the door. You didn't have to be here, she said. I know, but you came. Yes. She looked at him, this careful, quietly attentive man who'd sat in the back row and stayed there, who'd let her fill the front, who had put her name on his building. Donovan, she said. Yes. Will you come tomorrow in the morning, early? She paused. I want to show you something. He looked at her. How early? 5. All right. Good night. Good night, Clara. She drove home with Lily asleep in the back seat almost immediately the way children could sleep, after events that required their social engagement deeply and completely, and without apparent concern for the significance of what had just happened. Clara drove through Portland at 9 p.m. and thought about 5 o'clock tomorrow and what she was going to show him and whether she was ready for what showing him would mean. She decided she was. He was there at 5. She heard him knock, the specific knock she recognized, now the 2-tap that was his, and she opened the basement door and let him in. The kitchen was warm and lit and smelling of the bread she'd started proofing at midnight. She'd been here since 4:30, which was earlier than she needed to be, but she'd wanted the space to itself for a while first. Sit down, she said. She pointed to the stool. He sat. She went to the proofing station. She lifted the damp cloth from the bowl. Then she went to her apron pocket and took out the recipe paper. She unfolded it on the work table very carefully, the way she always handled it, with the particular attention you gave to things that were fragile from love rather than from age. She smoothed it flat with her palms. I've never shown this to anyone, she said, outside of family. He looked at the paper, her grandmother's handwriting precise and looping in blue pen that had faded to gray. Measurements and notes, and the particular shorthand that Gran had developed over decades of abbreviations, Clara had memorized the way she'd memorized everything, by touch, by repetition, by paying attention. What am I looking at? He asked quietly. The spiced buttercream, she said. The one from the competition, the family secret. She paused. I want to show you. He looked up from the paper to her face. Show me what he said. What's in it? She met his eyes. I've been thinking about what we've been building. Both of us. What's in the kitchen and what's in what else we're building. And I think the right way to say what I mean is to show you this. She put her hand on the paper. I've never told anyone the ingredients, not even Maggie, because it was Gran's and then it was mine, and I was afraid that sharing it would mean losing something. She looked at him steadily. I don't think it means that anymore, she said. He was very still. The particular stillness she knew meant he was fully present, not processing or planning. Just there. Clara, he said, it's brown sugar and salted butter and 3 spices cardamom and tonka bean and just a little white pepper. She smiled slightly. Gran called it the unholy trinity. She said the trick was balance. None of them should dominate. They should just be there underneath, making everything else more itself. He looked at her. Like a person, he said quietly. Like a person, she agreed. She began making the buttercream. She talked as she went about each ingredient, why the proportion worked, what happened when you got it wrong, what it felt like when you got it right. She talked about the first time she'd made it alone after Gran died, standing in her apartment at 22, with the recipe paper propped against the mixer, terrified she'd forgotten something. She hadn't forgotten anything. He sat on the stool and listened, not performing listening, just completely there in her kitchen at 5 in the morning, watching her hands. When it was done smooth and pale gold and smelling of spice, she took a small amount on a spatula and held it out to him. He tasted it, closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. Cardamom, he said, and something else. 2 something elses. I'll figure it out, he said. No, you won't, she said. That's the secret part. He looked at her, the slight shift in his face, the near laugh she knew was there when something actually moved him. Thank you, he said. I know it's just a recipe, she said, but it's not just a recipe. I know, he said, it's not. She set down the spatula and looked at him across the work table and thought, 3 years ago, I was alone with flour in a jar with $900 in it, and a daughter and a photo and a piece of paper. And now I am still all of those things, and I am also here in this kitchen I built and with this man who learned to be present. And that's not a rescue story. That's just what happened when 2 careful people stopped being quite so careful. She came around the work table. She stood in front of him. He was sitting on the stool, so they were almost the same height, and looked at his face, which she knew now, the way she knew bread dough, by the feel of it, the quality of it, what it told her about what was underneath. She kissed him, not the cheek kiss from the parking lot, a real one, present and intentional and entirely unhurried, the way she did things when she wanted them to be right. He put his hands on her face, both of them very gently, the way you held something you didn't want to drop. They stayed like that for a moment. When she pulled back, she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything because nothing needed to be said yet. The bread is going to be ready in 40 minutes, she said. I know, he said. I'll wait. She went back to her work table. He stayed on the stool. Outside, Portland was just beginning to wake the first delivery trucks, the first coffee shops, the first gray lightning of the March sky above the ceiling window. The city going through its morning preparation the way it always did, the way all mornings did the extraordinary business of another ordinary day. In the kitchen, Clara Whitfield made bread. Donovan Ashford sat on a stool and watched. The bread proofed. The oven heated. The timer was set. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was the point. The food hall opened on a Saturday in late April. Portland was doing something almost embarrassingly beautiful that morning. Cherry blossoms on the trees along Division Street, the air carrying the first real warmth of the year, the kind of spring day that made even people who'd lived here their whole lives look around and feel glad. Clara stood at the window of her kitchen at 6:30 and watched the light come in gold and unhurried, and thought about all the other mornings she'd stood in this spot. She'd thought about this morning differently over the last few months. In the early days of the lease, it had been a destination, the thing she was working toward, the proof of something. Now it was just a morning. The destination had become a place she actually lived. Lily came downstairs at 7, which was early for her on weekends, in her pajamas, with her hair everywhere and her rabbit in a drowsy expression. Is it today? Lily asked. It's today. Are lots of people coming? I think so. Lily considered this. I'm going to wear the blue dress. Good choice. Lily went back upstairs to get dressed. Clara turned back to her prep. She had 3 things to do before the opening: the morning pastry case, the first batch of bread for the cafe, and the complimentary cake she was setting out on the food hall's communal table as a gift to whoever walked through the door first. She'd spent a long time deciding what to make for that cake, and had landed on something she'd never made for a client, just for herself and Lily, and occasionally Maggie. A simple butter layer cake with a spiced buttercream. Gran's recipe. No competition, no occasion, just the thing she made when she wanted something to be exactly right. She made it with the focus she brought to all the important things, fully present, all her attention, nothing held back. Ravi arrived at 7:30 and they worked together through the prep with the comfortable efficiency of people who knew each other's rhythm now. Kara came at 9 to handle the front of house setup. The other food hall vendors, the cheese shop, the artisan noodle bar, the flower stall that Maggie had convinced someone to put in, were setting up around her, and she could hear them through the walls, the sound of a building becoming what it was going to be. At 10:30, Donovan arrived. He came in through the back way, which was what he did when he wasn't being the building's owner, and he was in a gray sweater and dark jeans instead of a suit, and he came directly to her. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," she said, and meant it, which still occasionally surprised her. He kissed her brief and present, the kind of kiss that had become natural between them in the 2 months since the buttercream morning, unremarkable in the best sense. Ravi, who knew, continued cutting croissants with professional discretion. "Lily's in the blue dress," he said. "She's been asking me every 10 minutes whether it's time to open. She'd be good at this, you know. The business side. She has instincts." Clara looked at him. "She's 6. She has 6-year-old instincts that are already quite good." He picked up a croissant end from the trim pile and ate it without asking, which was a habit he'd acquired that she found completely endearing. Also, she's been explaining the menu to everyone who comes within earshot and correctly upselling people to the lemon cardamom. Clara laughed. "When did she do that?" "Just now. Patrick's out front with her. I think she's running the pre-opening preview." She shook her head. "I need to get the cake out front." "I'll carry it." "I can carry it." "I know you can. I'd like to." She let him carry the cake. It was not a concession. It was a decision about what she wanted, which had become over the past few months less fraught than it had been for a while. She could do things alone. She'd proven that again and again. The point was no longer proving it. At 11 o'clock, Donovan unlocked the front door. Not the ceremony of it, just unlocked the door and stepped back because Claire was standing beside him. And this was her moment, not his. She pushed the door open. The first people in were a young couple who were clearly there for the wedding cake consultation she had scheduled at 11:15, and a family with 2 kids who went directly to the noodle bar, and an elderly woman in a raincoat who looked at everything very carefully, and then at the spiced butter cake on the communal table and said, "Oh my goodness, what is that?" "That's the house cake," Clara said. "It's for everyone. Please help yourself." The woman tried it. She stood there for a moment with a look on her face that Clara recognized, not the performed enjoyment of someone saying they liked something, but the genuine arrested surprise of a flavor that was doing what good food was supposed to do, making the person feel briefly more themselves. "This is extraordinary," the woman said. "Thank you," said Clara. "My grandmother's recipe." The woman had a second piece. The morning filled up, slowly at first, and then steadily, the particular Portland pace of a neighborhood event. People who'd heard about it from Maggie, or from Instagram, or from Shannon Henderson's latest post. People from the neighborhood who'd been watching the building change and were finally ready to see what it was. People who'd driven from other parts of the city because someone had texted them a photo of the exterior sign. Clara's, in the morning light. Lily was at the door for the first hour, self-appointed greeter, taking her role extremely seriously. She shook hands with people and said, "Welcome, this is my mom's bakery," with the poise of a child who had been told what was happening and decided it was the correct amount of exciting. Ruth came at noon. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the kitchen through the glass and at the sign above the door, and her eyes were bright with something she didn't put into words. She hugged Clara for a long time. "Eleanor would have loved this," she said. "I know," Clara said. "I think she'd have had specific opinions about the signage." Ruth laughed, surprise genuine. She absolutely would have. Maggie's flower stall was doing excellent business. The cheese shop had a line. The noodle bar had a line. Clara's cafe counter had a constant queue that Kara managed with the efficiency of someone who'd found her professional calling. In the middle of all of it, Clara stood in her kitchen and worked. Because that was what she did. She made things. She'd been making things at 4 a.m. for years, and she'd keep making them, and the fact that people were out there eating them was wonderful. And the fact that her name was on the building was wonderful, and the fact that her daughter was greeting strangers at the door was wonderful. But mostly it was wonderful that the bread was good, and the buttercream was exactly right, and the morning was warm, and she was here. At 2 in the afternoon, when the rush had eased slightly, she took off her apron and walked out to the food hall's communal area, which was full of people eating at the long shared tables. Her spec had asked for the ones that said, "This is a place where strangers eat together." Donovan was standing near the window, not circulating, not networking, not being the building's owner, just standing with a coffee, watching the room in that particular way he had of being completely present with what was in front of him. She went and stood beside him. They looked at the room together. The families and the couples and the friends and the elderly woman who'd had 2 pieces of cake and was now talking at length to Patrick about something, and Lily weaving through the tables with a rabbit under her arm, stopping to show various people the owl sweater she'd changed back into after her official greeting duties. "Your building," she said. "Your kitchen," he said. Both things, he agreed. She stood there with him in the warm afternoon in the building that bore her name, and she thought about all the 4 a.m. mornings that had led to this one, and she thought about a flashlight in a dark basement and a wedding cake fragment on parchment and the honest thing to do. She thought about her grandmother's recipe in her pocket. She pressed her thumb against it once. Gran's handwriting, Gran's spices, Gran's careful work passed down and carried forward and made new again every time she baked it. That was how things lasted, not because you preserved them unchanged, but because you kept making them, kept doing the work, kept showing up, kept being present in the kitchen at 5 in the morning with your whole attention. She'd been doing that for years. She was still doing it. And now she wasn't doing it alone. Not because someone had rescued her, she hadn't needed rescuing, and she demonstrated that over and over. But because she'd built something worth joining, and someone had recognized that and had shown up to be part of it without trying to take it over. That was different. That was the thing that didn't have an easy word. She could feel Lily approaching before she saw her, the small, specific energy of a 6-year-old who had spotted her mother and was navigating tables with purpose. "Mommy," Lily said, appearing at her elbow, "that lady by the cheese wants to know if we do birthday cakes." "We do," Clara said. "Tell her to come find me and we'll talk." Lily looked at Donovan. "Did you try the spiced cake?" "I did," he said seriously. "It has a secret in it," Lily said. "I know," he said. "I think I know what it is." Lily looked at Clara. "Does he—" "Maybe while," Clara said. Lily looked back at Donovan. "What is it?" "I think," Donovan said very seriously, "that it's patience and paying attention and a little bit of something that doesn't have a name." Lily considered this. "Then yeah," she said, "that sounds right." And she went back to the cheese lady. Clara looked at Donovan. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything because some things were better not said. Some things were better made. The way bread was better made than described the way a kitchen at 5 in the morning was better than any explanation of it. She went back to work. He watched. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland did in April: cherry blossoms and coffee, in a kind of impractical hope that was nevertheless the right feeling for the season. Inside, people ate. The bread was good. The buttercream was exactly right.